Emily hesitated, staring at the janitor wanted sign on the door. Should she go in or not? What if they said no? Finally, gathering courage, she overpowered herself and crossed the threshold of the notary's office. "Good afternoon. May I?" she asked. At the desk in the reception area sat a secretary about 25 years old and looked at the guest with contrived importance. "It is possible. Come in, woman." "And you on what question?" "Entry into the inheritance." "A will?" "Actually, we have a recording." Emily felt a little uncomfortable at being addressed in such an unpleasant way. The word woman cut her ears, even though it didn't seem to have a negative connotation. But that was only at first glance. God, do I really look that bad? I'm only 30, Emily's mind raced. However, she had no time to think about it now, and she moved on to the purpose of the visit. "I'm sorry, but I'm just here because of an aide. Do you still need a cleaner?" The secretary immediately changed her haughty look. In front of her was a cup of fragrant, steaming coffee and a tray of fresh cinnamon and vanilla buns. Emily recognized it immediately, since she spent a lot of time at the stove, but the secretary clearly had nothing to do with baking. It must be Isabel's bakery. Emily thought she didn't bake the scones herself, but simply paid for delivery. Taking a bite, the pretty girl took a sip of her coffee without embarrassment and finally deigned to answer. "Yes, that's right. Have you thought about it? A cleaning lady is not a librarian in a run-down village. The building, as you can see, is quite large. And there's a parking lot in front of the office. Are you strong enough?" Emily's cheeks flushed with shame. "It's enough." "Why is there any doubt?" The secretary grinned, still chewing on her bun. "Well, sweetheart, you look so puny, not much bigger than a mop. How tall are you?" "About 5. 165, Emily replied. At that moment, she was literally ready to fall to the ground with shame. That secretary's got a lot of nerve. "Is there a casting call for a cleaning lady?" At that moment, the doors of one of the offices opened, and on the threshold appeared the figure of a trim man of about 35 years old in a business suit and shine-shoed shoes. "Angley, are you interviewing without me again? Can't you forget your modeling agency?" The secretary immediately shrank back and ducked her nose into the papers on the table. The notary looked at the visitor. "Come in, girl, I'll tell you what's what. Though I'm sure you'll suit us just fine." "And you just like that by eye, immediately determined?" Did not hold back, excited by the conversation with the secretary Emily. And she did it involuntarily, unable to restrain herself. In the depths of her soul, she did not even suspect that a conversation with a notary could be so easy and relaxed. "Well, I think you're a good fit for us. And we have a full benefits package. That means no gray schemes, no envelope wages. Vacation, sick leave, and New Year's gifts for the kids. Ah, it's a pity you joined us later. However, I'll give you the presents in advance. I'll order a delivery and they'll bring everything to your house. The kids should have a party, right?" Damien suggested. "Oh, no, you don't have to worry. It must be so expensive. I haven't earned a penny yet," Emily exclaimed. But the man just waved her off. "That's out of the question. Children should have a childhood. Take my word for it. I know it from my own experience. You'll be at work tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I usually open the office myself, but if I'm late, Angie will do it. Anyway, welcome to the team." The guest was confused by the surprise, but she responded to the handshake. Damien's palm felt as strong as if it had been cast from lead. His right wrist wore an elegant, twisted bracelet, while his left wrist wore a modest watch with a worn leather band. It was my father's. It was registered to me. A pedant, he didn't like to be late. So he wore it without taking it off. And when he was gone, I took him for myself. Nice piece, about 45 years old. They're accurate, minute to minute. It's just a matter of getting it oiled in time to keep it running. Thank you, Damien. For the gifts and for the good attitude, Emily said eagerly. The notary nodded and immediately called the delivery service to bring the presents to Emily's children, even if they were all ready for the past, but still for the holiday. As she left the notary's office, Emily exhaled a sigh of relief and put her face into the shy rays of the February sun. Never before had she been so anxious about her future work. After the recent snowstorm, there was a thaw, and everything around her was floating and melting. It seemed that winter was crying bitter tears, giving way to the beautiful spring. The birds sang on her soul. 3 days ago, she sat with suitcases at the station and did not know where to hide. And now she had found a rented place and a job. So what if she had to live in an old outbuilding next door to her sweet grandmother? And the job was hardly a dream job. But that's not the main thing. After all, what could be better than the happiness of your children? And they loved it in the city. Matthew, Darcy, and Alex looked at the passers-by and the signs in the windows, the large apartment buildings, and the endless traffic that fed the main artery of the city. "Wow, this is just a dream city," exclaimed the amazed Alex. "Do you realize why we have been living in the village all this time? Why didn't we move to the city right away?" Matthew asked with obvious disapproval. Emily looked at the kids with a smile. "Wow, you're fast. What Daddy and I had enough money for, we bought. Do you think I wouldn't want to live in the city?" "Come on, Mom, they're kidding. It was nice in the village, too. The nature there was so nice, and they had hedgehogs in the yard at night. I'm sure that won't happen here." "The hedgehogs would be a pancake in no time," said Darcy, judiciously. Remembering her daughter's answer, Emily couldn't help smiling. It was not for nothing, after all, that she had lived in the world and been blessed with such beautiful babies. Bringing to her new home, Emily involuntarily recalled the day when her life in the village changed once and for all. And it happened just a week ago, when the neighborhood had been caught in a snowstorm. A February morning. Emily woke up earlier than usual. The blizzard raged outside her window and threw snow at the window, making her shudder every time she thought their little house would fall apart in another gust of wind. "Look at the way it's blowing. Why didn't I go to the store yesterday? I was lazy. And now, here we are," Emily thought sadly. The young mother's heart knew how to love infinitely, sharing love equally among all the children. Every morning Emily woke up thinking about her family and her babies. The house had gotten cold overnight, and Emily had to get up and put a few logs in the fireplace to bring the heat back in. It was a good thing that they didn't do anything idle in the summer. Some of the woods they'd gathered themselves. Some they'd bought. Though it was still necessary to save money, only the furnace was notable for its enviable voracity and burned wood without measure. Thanks to the hot fire in the stove and the heat from the stove, Emily realized she couldn't sleep. She got up and, after making the bed, headed for the kitchen. Sleep no more, but breakfast needs to be made for the kids. Stop yawning and rubbing your eyes. Otherwise the boys will wake up now and I don't have anything ready, Emily prodded herself. Blindly, she flicked the light switch and the kitchen was instantly flooded with dim yellow light. The light bulb should be replaced. I'll get by, though. Next paycheck I'll buy one, she thought, and fumbled for her glasses, which were lying on the edge of the table in a special case. After giving birth to the twins, Matthew and Darcy, Emily's eyesight had diminished considerably. No, she wasn't blind, not at all. She mostly needed her glasses for reading or cooking, when she needed to keep up with the necessary ingredient rates while cooking, especially the baked goods the boys loved most. At first, Emily was very frightened, but the doctor reassured her, saying that with proper nutrition and a complex of vitamins it would surely recover. However, since that day 5 years had passed, and she still could not do without glasses. Embarrassed by her unusual appearance, Emily wore them only when she needed them. Her glasses were round, like those of a fairy tale sorceress. She chose them herself, or rather not the glasses themselves, but only their shape. Emily wanted to make the little ones happy with her appearance. How can you not smile when in the morning your mother, who looks like a professor of astronomy, makes you breakfast? Emily had 3 children, twins Matthew and Darcy, aged 5, and 6-year-old Alex. Living in a quiet village, Emily got up very early every morning to make breakfast. Although the family lived modestly, there was always joy and comfort in the house. Emily's kindness and love for the children was incredible. Even if the mother herself lacked something, she always did everything possible to keep the children fed and happy. She decided to bake some sweet rolls and pulled out the dough she'd prepared the night before. It was only now that she remembered that they were out of sugar. Well, now we have to go to the store. It's snowing right up to the windows, Emily sighed sadly. After walking out into the yard for a few minutes, Emily looked around. She could get to the store. Except would the salesman be able to do it? Mrs. Johnson was retired, after all. She'd have a much harder time of it, Emily thought anxiously. There was a light frost outside and the snow crunched pleasantly underfoot. As she went inside to get her purse, Emily saw Darcy, who was always up before the others. The early bird had arrived. I was beginning to worry. Emily smiled. I'm blushing, Mom, Darcy said, walking over to her sad mother. We're out of sugar. I can't eat semolina without it. Emily's heart squeezed painfully. Don't worry, my dear. I'll think of something. I'll run to the store and we'll have sugar. Tears glistened in Darcy's eyes. Thank you, Mommy. I love you so much, Emily said with a smile. She took the last of her money and put on her old down jacket and went to the store. It was a hard walk. In some places the snow was almost up to her knees and was trying to get into her boots. Nothing, bear with it. He who doesn't take risks doesn't drink champagne, Emily whispered. Every now and then she stopped to wipe her fogged glasses. Finally, she took them off and just put them in her pocket. What good were they now, really? I'm not completely blind, and she wasn't going to be reading books for the next hour and a half. Emily was the first to make her way down the snow-covered street of the village. Most of the locals were still asleep. Or if they were, they'd cleared the snow from their yards first, and only then did they go outside. Emily's face was flushed from the cold and walking through the drifts, and her mouth was steaming. Finally, the store building showed up ahead. Usually it was open early enough, because the bakery nearby brought in the freshest bread. But today the weather had changed, and the store was closed. Emily stood knee-deep in snow and cried as she stared at the huge lock on the door. Sure, she could wait until it opened, but when else would it be? When Farmer Johnson would drive the tractor out, when he would clear the road. Even so, there was no assurance that Grace the saleswoman would be on time. The resentment wanted to scream at the blizzard, the injustice of life, and the fiendish fate that had treated her so cruelly. If Caroline were alive now, what was there to say? It was all so clear. Emily's journey back was a little easier. She'd gotten the hang of it, after all. The villagers were already awake and waving their shovels in synchronized fashion, laying down easy-to-walk paths. When they saw Emily, they waved at her, bringing a smile to her face. It was understandable they were greeting a postal worker, and this profession in the village was more than respected. Emily worked in the department of parcels, as well as sending valuable parcels. All in all, not a bad place to work, considering the reasonable schedule and proximity to home. Since Emily still hadn't solved the sugar problem, all she could think about on the way back was how to get out of such an awkward situation. Suddenly, one very interesting idea came to her mind. Why not bake apple pies? Yes, they would not be as sweet as she would like, but still better than noodles or semolina, devoid of flavor. I wish I had a jar of honey. Emily liked this idea so much that she involuntarily increased her pace. They had a few apples left over from the fall harvest. When she entered the house, she threw off her down jacket and boots, and then got to work. After rolling out the dough, kneading the ingredients, and putting the tray in the oven, Emily waited. The golden and flavorful pies came out of the oven in less than an hour. And this despite the fact that the wood was almost burned through and the heat from the oven was much weaker. The house was immediately filled with appetizing smells that made even Emily's appetite grow. By this time, not only Darcy was awake, but Matthew and Butterfly as well. Soon the silence of the winter morning was broken by the general sound of children's footsteps. Almost simultaneously, there was the sound of ringing laughter and joyful voices. Emily smiled, her heart filled with happiness. She knew that today would be a day full of laughter and games for the little ones and would end with a good night's sleep. Now all that was left was to serve everything on the table. She arranged the chairs in the order in which the cups stood. The reason for this was that each child liked something different. One preferred tea, the other cocoa. Emily knew all the children's preferences in great detail. When everyone was finally gathered in the kitchen, she looked at their sweet faces with joy. At that moment, tears involuntarily flowed from the young mother's eyes, so big and warm that they involuntarily burned her flushed cheeks. Emily looked at her small but so dear world and realized that every day it was getting better. Hearing the divine smell of baking, the children rushed to the table and began to eat the pies with gusto. Darcy, nodding eagerly, exclaimed, "Mommy, these pies are delicious. The apples are so sweet. I even forgot about the sugar." Emily smiled. Is that really a problem? The main thing is that there should always be love and understanding at home, that we are together and happy every moment, like fingers on the palm of a hand, always close to each other, and when we need to, we can even make a fist. There are 5 fingers on a hand, and there are 4 of us, Alex objected. Emily lowered her eyes in embarrassment. But how could she tell her son that Daddy had passed away? It was too soon. But how could he guess what she was thinking at that moment? Why insult him with such questions? And after breakfast, Emily had a reward waiting for her. As the children unanimously called it one of the nicest mornings of their lives, she realized with tears in her eyes that they were happy, despite the cold and inclement weather outside. Happy because they knew they had the best mom in the world. But Nayli once again realized the most important thing in her life was taking care of her babies. And although her family had to overcome many difficulties, The support of each other made them stronger. After all, it has long been known true happiness in simple little things. Well, that's it. Lucky there are still apples left, but I'll still need to buy sugar to spare, Emily thought. She had been deprived of many things in life, but she had overcome difficulties. Not a second regretted the choice she had made. After all, children were her life, and she was ready to care, love, and support them until her last breath. If she only knew what would happen next night and where her life's road would lead her. The day passed relatively quietly. By lunchtime, the storm had died down and the village children, from small to large, were pouring out into the street. Matthew, Darcy, and Alex followed suit, taking their old sleds with them. Their cheeks instantly flushed in the cold, and they smiled sweetly. Emily, on the other hand, took the opportunity to go to the store to buy a couple of pounds of sugar. There was no chance of another snowstorm in the evening. It's better to buy some now. It would be very hard on the children without sugar. It was obvious. Afterward, Emily was very sorry for the act, for Kate had fallen through the gap in the old stove and onto the floor as soon as she crossed the threshold. Perhaps it wouldn't have been a big deal. Only as a pity, Alex, who loved drawing, had left his children's sketchbook and a set of colored pencils on the floor. Ironically, the smoldering charcoal just landed on the paper, thus providing food for the fire to grow. The flame was not born immediately. It first traveled across the carpet, then spread to the walls, to the furniture. It just so happened that the children walking outside couldn't see what was happening. Emily couldn't, since the house was in a low spot. The wooden outhouse burst into flames like a match in a matter of minutes, black smoke rising to the sky, and people with buckets and shovels came screaming to the fire. It's always like that in the village. You look around, it seems like everyone is for himself. But if there is a disaster, everyone rushes to help. How could they not? Everyone in the village knows each other from childhood. And they knew Emily's dead husband too. But that didn't help anyone. It was someone else's fault. An SUV driver crushed the cab of his old truck like it was cardboard instead of iron. All the airbags in the foreign car deployed. The driver got off with bruises, and Caroline was just standing by the cab, wiping the mirror with a rag. Always liked cleanliness, so he paid the price. If he'd stayed in the cab, maybe he'd have survived. But this way, no way. The EMTs who arrived on the scene where all they could do was throw up their hands. From that day on, Emily was widowed. Residents of the village, as they could, tried to help the unfortunate woman, who brought her root vegetables, who brought potatoes from the vegetable garden or clothes for the children. Of course, Emily was happy about that too. The wages at the post office were small, and the kids are often sick. The hut is old and there are cracks everywhere. How could the heat get in there? So Matthew, Darcy, and Alex got colds all the time. And now they're homeless, despite the neighbors' help. Emily's house burned to the ground. Good thing she had her papers in her purse. Emily kept wanting to file for more benefits, so she carried a folder of birth certificates in her purse and her passport with her everywhere. What's a passport without? Standing at the fire, Emily cried, smearing tears on her face. Seeing the smoke from the store, she ran as fast as she could. What was the use? The house couldn't be saved anyway. "Mom, don't cry, we'll build a new one," said the children. "Do you want to make snow?" "What Eskimo snow?" Holding the rope from the sled, Alex said. "It won't work out. It's always cold there and polar bears come to visit. Have you seen Kate?" Well, when spring comes, the house will melt, Darcy said. The children didn't realize that their mother was thinking about something else. Lord, what's all this to me? Carline's dead. That rich man never gave a dime to the children. He put up a monument, and that was the end of it. Wreath so big you can't see him among the rest. He paid his own way out of here, got a suspended sentence. He had so much alcohol in his blood that he could buy up all the villages. Now the house is burned down, Emily whispered, holding back her tears. People came up to her, calming her down. Some gave the children sweets, others took out toys, others collected things for the burned people. Emily thanked through tears, hugged, cried. The family had to spend the night in the building of an old school. Everyone in the village had little living space, not like cottages, where the territory is only mansions. Everyone could only sympathize. Recently, the school was recognized as an emergency and began to prepare it for demolition. However, in the opinion of many, it could stand for decades more. Emily sat with the children in the teacher's lounge. It was the closest to the exit of most of the classrooms and was not a danger to the burned-out children. Emily didn't sleep that night, thinking about how to move on with her life. She dreamed of moving to the city before, but she couldn't. It was one thing or another, and now fate had told her to try her luck in a new place. Maybe this wasn't the end, but only the beginning. She was brought out of her reverie by a strange sound that resonated with the noise of passing cars. At first, Emily didn't immediately realize where it was coming from, but when she listened more closely, she realized that the sound was coming from the town square. Emily walked closer and almost immediately saw a crowd gathered around the street musician. It was a man in his 70s, maybe more. Emily couldn't be more specific. Age was a deceiving thing. Things happen. An elderly musician with a violin stood on the corner of the square, surrounded by passers-by who admired his playing. His gray hair fluttered in the wind, poking out from under his old hat. Emily came even closer, attracted by the sound of the divine music, and froze in indecision. Most remarkable were the musician's eyes, which radiated warmth for those around him and passion for the music. He wore an old coat covered with dust and patches, old pants and the same shabby shoes. The elderly musician held the violin with tenderness and respect, as if it were his old and faithful friend, with whom he had passed through many trials and obstacles. When the stranger held the bow, it glided lightly across the strings like a sailboat on a wave of sound. The melody that the old man created was filled with deep emotion and warmth, making the hearts of passers-by swoon with amazement and recall long-forgotten pleasant moments. For some inexplicable reason, the music made Emily freeze in place, as if she had become a sturdy tin soldier in an instant. Meanwhile, a crowd of people had gathered around, each of whom found something different, special, unique in the music. One heard in it a longing for lost love, another the joy of a new day, and the third, the hope for a bright future. God, what a talent! And why does he play on the street and not in a concert hall? Whispered someone next to Emily. What do you mean? Why? You're just like a little girl, really. He's a vagrant, said someone else. He's not a vagrant. He's not a tramp. If he is, then where's his box of money? No, it's something else, said a third. Emily smiled and, not wanting to take part in the conversation, turned her gaze back to the musician. The sound of his violin traveled across the square like a wave, reminding everyone of the power of art to warm and melt the ice in even the coldest heart. The street musician looked at his audience with gratitude and love. He seemed to know ahead of time that his music brought joy and comfort, and his violin was just a bridge to the heart of everyone who stopped to listen. A tear rolled slowly down Emily's cheek. How good he is after all. And the music is unparalleled, she couldn't help herself. Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out some money. She had no sooner taken out the small bill she intended to give to the old artist than a huge shaggy dog flew past her like a whirlwind. "Oh, Charlie, is that you, my friend? How glad I am to see you," said the man in a low voice. In response, the dog began to jump up and lick his master from head to toe. All right. That's enough of that already. It's good to see me, knowing that while I was playing the violin, you were chasing pigeons in the square. Weren't you? I can see it in your eyes." The musician smiled involuntarily. The audience had already dispersed, and Emily could freely approach and give the money. Seeing the bill clutched in Emily's fingers, the musician shook his head. "I'm sorry, dear lady, I won't take that money from you. The thing is, I play for free for my soul, and for Charlie, of course, and he's a naughty boy." Emily lowered her eyes in embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you." "Oh, really, what offense? Take my word for it. I'm too old to take offense at anyone but myself," the man replied. As if to confirm his words, the dog barked loudly. At that moment, the man seemed especially haggard. His hands trembled and his eyes were filled with an unbearable sadness. Emily asked quietly, "What is the matter with you? Are you unwell? Is there anything I can do to help you?" The musician looked up at her tiredly and, smiling slightly, stroked his dog. "Sweet girl, I have very little time left. I am terminally ill. It just so happens that Violin and Charlie have become my only family for many years. I beg you, if you can, to take Charlie in with you. He needs warmth and care. Keep the violin in memory of the old man who once attracted you with his playing." Only now did Emily feel the pain in the elderly artist's words and the helplessness of his situation. Tears sprang from her eyes. She had told him, without wanting to, everything that had happened to her in the last few days. He listened in silence, carefully considering every word Emily said. Frankly, the man understood Emily's need to talk, and he took her words seriously. "Oh, you've had it in life, sweetheart. If you can't have Charlie, don't feel bad. I'll understand. The old man's not quite out of his mind yet. My name's Block Wargrave, actually. Music is everything to me, though I've spent my precious years doing something else entirely. Now in my old age, you can't make me play in the big halls. But for my soul, I really want to play with feeling," he said. Emily's eyes were still glistening with tears. Embracing the musician's trembling hands in her own, she said quietly, "You have my word. I'll take Charlie in, take care of him as my friend. It's true I'm renting. But the landlady was just saying she's looking for a dog for the yard. And I'll keep your violin safe and sound. I dreamed of learning to play the violin or piano as a child, but I never learned." The elderly man suddenly became emotional and pressed the case to his chest, as if saying goodbye to a piece of himself. Emily, gently stroking his faithful dog, promised to take care of him no matter what it cost her. Block Wargrave put his arm around her shoulders and cried softly. Just like that, they stood in the middle of the square, a tall, gray-haired man and a petite, frail woman beside a happily wagging shaggy dog. "I suggested you take him for a reason, didn't I? You see, Charlie makes his own choices. You may not believe me, but he does. I can see he's a good judge of character," the musician said. "Goodbye, my boy," he said goodbye, making sure the dog didn't see his tears. Charlie became anxious, but he could not disobey his master and obediently followed Emily. The two of them returned home together. Needless to say how happy the children were. "Mom, you're a real magician. First you brought us candy, and now you brought us a dog," Alex said happily. But Emily only smiled meaningfully, trying not to remember such a painful history of the dog. Charlie, on the other hand, was calm and businesslike. After sniffing each of the kids, he went out into the yard to get acquainted with the landlady. "Mom, the candy is so delicious." "Who gave such delicious things?" Alex did not persist. "What do you care? Tasty." "Fine. I'm not asking where the candy came from. The important thing is that they're there," Darcy objected. Emily smiled. "Well, I'll give you that. So much for the mysteries behind the scenes. They gave me candy at work to celebrate last New Year's Eve." "Wow. So we'll have 2 holidays now," Alex exclaimed excitedly. Meanwhile, Emily went into the kitchen and started cooking dinner. Mistress Liz immediately expressed her appreciation for the dog. "Oh, Emily, he's such a good dog, he's a miracle. I can't do without a guard. My neighbors are nasty. They share everything with my ex. They don't want to work, so they're looking for easy money. They've already taken everything out of the yard. But it's going to be different with Charlie." Emily nodded and, stirring the frying potatoes in the skillet, replied, "I'm not the one you should be thanking. Charlie's former owner is a musician by God. He's the one who gave me the doggy." Emily's heart clenched painfully at the thought of Block Wargrave. Maybe I should never have let him go. But what could I do when medicine is powerless? What if there was no one to give him a glass of water? But it was too late to think about that. Emily vowed to go to the square to see him again. Fate had it otherwise. The next day, Emily started work. The former model, Angie, immediately pointed out her superiority, explaining what should be done first. "You take over Damien's office first. Be sure to keep the piano clean and water the flowers. And the fish. But I feed them myself, so it's a little tricky for you to figure out." Emily nodded demurely, realizing that in the notary's absence his secretary would command as she saw fit. With a sigh, the newly minted cleaning lady set to work. Emily's mind was at ease, for the kind Liz had promised to help and assist her in any way she could. "I don't have grandchildren, honey. At least I'll get to spend some time with yours. My son's gone to prison, lost his way. And my daughter went abroad. I haven't seen her in 15 years, so don't be sorry. I'll play with the kids. I don't get tired with them. On the contrary, I'm resting my soul." Emily put her arm around her shoulders with a smile. "Yes, I understand, Liz. Thank you so much. Take as much time as you need. If things get tough, just let me know and I'll do something about it." Despite Angie's nagging, Emily liked working at the notary's office. Quiet, peaceful, no yelling or discontent. People come in cultured, always saying hello even to her, the janitor, and Damien's a great leader. Sometimes he'll sit down at the piano at lunchtime, and he'll play something that'll bring tears to your eyes and tears to your eyes, except Angie didn't like the sound of the piano. Every time she covered her ears with her palms or used miniature earphones for her phone. Emily only laughed, realizing that she had no idea that Damien was playing the works of great composers of the past and present. Emily didn't get along with Angie from the first minute she met her. The situation didn't change until about a week later, when the cleaning lady had been working for about a week. Instead of accepting the newcomer's presents, The secretary did everything she could to make her work a torture. She would break a tea or knock over a flower in a pot. She would deliberately choose the biggest one so that there would be more earth on the parquet. But Emily tolerated and immediately ran to the store for a new pot. Of course, she'd get her money back. But that wasn't the point at all. To tell the truth, Emily just couldn't afford to let the flower die. But how could it be so beautiful? When I lived in the suburbs, I always kept my flower clean, weeded it regularly, planted new flowers. Beautiful. It hurts my soul to this day. I had to quit. Then why did you run away from your suburb to the city? They must have gotten all the suitors and left you with none, Angley said with a sneer in her voice. Maybe they have. But that's not for you to judge. You're not that far behind me, Emily said. Angley bit her lip resentfully. She knows where to hit, she thought. But that's okay. We'll see who's who. Of course, she didn't say it out loud, but smirked meaningfully. She already knew that Emily's weakness was her poor eyesight, which forced her to wear glasses from time to time. Looking to see where the cleaning lady had put the case with them, Angie deliberately threw the thing to the floor and stepped on it with her huge 10-inch heel. There was a treacherous crunch, and Emily's heart clenched painfully. Her glasses, similar to those worn by fairy tale wizards, were hopelessly ruined. No, they could be worn, of course, but more as a pince-nez or monocle than as glasses. One of the glasses showed huge cracks that diverged in different directions and risked falling out at any second. Well, how could that be? I took great care of them, Emily sobbed. Oh, don't get me started on the tears. She did, didn't she? If she had, she wouldn't have thrown them around. They're expensive. You'll buy them. It's no big loss, Angley said with a nonchalant look. Emily wanted to say something else, but then she waved her hand. What can you say when you can't find any proof of the secretary's guilt? There she sat, shining like a new coin. How long had it been since I'd had such negative feelings about a person? It seemed like Angie was doing this on purpose to humiliate her as much as possible. But that wasn't all that upset Emily. Trying to find Block Wargrave, she had come to the square time after time, but each time she found the place where he had once performed his street concert empty. I wish I could see him just this one time, Emily whispered, and wandered home. It was hard on her soul. She felt as if she had betrayed an elderly musician who had played so heartfelt as if he were doing it for the last time. Otherwise, Emily was fine. After hearing about the glasses incident, Damien called Emily into his office and held out a small box that easily fit in her hand. Here, take this. It's a gift. Lenses for your eyes. You can rest assured they'll fit. I've looked at your former glasses and know all the right specs. Ah, now that's a gift. I've always wanted one of these. Thank you, Damien. It's a real miracle, Emily exclaimed, barely holding back tears. But the boss just waved his hand. Take it. You're welcome. Since then, Emily began to work with even greater zeal. And not because the boss bought her contact lenses, but because Damien was a man with a capital letter, giving her faith in kindness and mutual assistance. But Angie was not happy with this turn of events. Few people knew that the cunning beauty was working on two fronts. No, not on the competitors, of course, not at all, but on the people who urgently needed to know to whom their rich relative bequeathed all his financial assets. Knowledge is power, and it gives you an advantage. It is this kind of clients and rendered services and coquettish beauty, receiving for this good money. She secretly installed a wiretap and video surveillance in Damien's office. Naturally, the notary didn't know about all this, and neither did Emily, who didn't know anything about such matters. Perhaps Angie Lee's shenanigans would have gone unpunished if one day the following had not happened. By that time, Emily was beginning to realize that the world of big money and secret deals was not as good as she had imagined it to be. But the most amazing thing happened a little while later, when Emily was late for work, cleaning Damien's office at dusk. Angie had left an hour ago, leaving the janitor with the keys to the office. She'd been doing that more and more often these days, putting everything on poor Emily's shoulders. It was only easier with technology, though. It all started when Emily, unknowingly, touched a folder of documents on the edge of her desk. "Oh, why am I waving the mop around like this? I'm going to get into trouble," she said to herself, and began to stack the folders. Suddenly one of them opened, and some leaves scattered on the floor. Among the typewritten pages was a small notebook, written in small handwriting. It would seem to be nothing special. Documents are like document signatures, seals, stamps, especially when you don't understand anything about them. Luckily, by now Emily was wearing lenses and could read what was written. But when she opened the notebook, she felt uneasy from the very first page. The owner's first and last name, Block Wargrave, stared back at her. Emily instinctively recoiled and let the notebook out of her hands. Was this the notebook of her recent acquaintance from the town square? No, that's just impossible. "A mistake," Emily whispered. But, as it turned out a little later, mistakes in such matters were ruled out. In fact, Block Wargrave's diary lay before her, along with a will drawn up about 2 weeks ago. The surprise and excess of feeling made her dizzy. Realizing that it was not good to read other people's documents, she was about to put them back in the folder, when suddenly she came across her name in the column of heirs to the huge fortune of millionaire Block Wargrave. How was that even possible? Was this all a dream? No, you can't be so naive. It's all a mistake. The last name was just a coincidence, Emily assured herself. But no matter how much she looked at the paperwork, her name never went anywhere. But why? Why me, and why all this circus of cross-dressing? Emily asked herself the same question. Eventually, tired of guessing, she opened the diary and ran her eyes over a few pages. The will, however, was even more shocking and unexpected. It stated that Block Wargrave, single and childless, would leave his fortune to Emily, who had done her best to provide for her children. Emily read and could not believe her eyes. Her hands trembled with a mixed feeling of delight and amazement. This virtually unknown man, whom she thought was a traveling musician, had made her his heiress. Emily involuntarily began to read on, and with each successive sentence her amazement grew. The wealth that Block Wargrave had left her was simply enormous. It was nothing she could have dreamed of. And now she was a wealthy heiress. Although, despite all of this, she felt a kind of confusion that had arisen in her heart just a short while ago. Despite the huge inheritance, she didn't want to give up any of her children and risk their future for the sake of a large sum in her bank account. What if this was some kind of trap? And now her family would be in danger. What was written in the diary shocked her to the core. As it turned out from the story of Block Wargrave, in his early youth, he worked as a singing teacher in one of the schools in the village. He came there on assignment and taught music and music notation to the village boys. In a small village, where life flowed in its own quiet way, Block was the embodiment of a true teacher. Every day, devoting himself to teaching boys and girls, he passed on to them his knowledge gained at the School of Music. As it turned out, taught Block Wargrave and Emily's mother, Grace. True, then the girl was still small and almost did not remember her teacher. but who remembered. Unfortunately, Block's career did not go right away because of the conflict with the school principal. After working for 3 years, he returned to the city, where he plunged into the complicated world of the then nascent business. A lot had to go through a young teacher before he was able to achieve status and financial independence. But only the passion for music did not go anywhere. On the contrary, it became even stronger, making him yearn more and more for bygone times. It so happened that Block's family did not work out, and for most of his life he was a bachelor. About a year ago, the businessman learned that he was terminally ill. The doctors were very frank. They didn't hide the truth. They told it like it is. That rarely happens. And Block Wargrave appreciated sincerity. Since then, he's been doing a lot of good deeds. Acting as a street musician, however, unlike his fellow musicians, he did not take money as payment. On the contrary, he gave it to those who needed it. No one could understand Block Wargrave's motives, and he just lived, enjoyed his music, and raised a dog that was destined to be an orphan. And recently, in a conversation with Emily, learned that his favorite village school, where he began his life's journey, will be closed due to lack of funding and emergency condition. This news hurt the businessman in his heart. After all, it was the place where many generations received the necessary knowledge that could be useful to them in life. As a former teacher, Block Wargrave realized that without a school, the village would lose its soul. That's when the businessman decided to use his inheritance for a good cause, large-scale reconstruction of the school, and help a large family, Emily, whose mother he once taught music in elementary school. All of this was spelled out in the will, which had come to her attention. Rereading it over and over, Emily cried and couldn't believe her eyes. God, are there really people like that out there? Help me rebuild the school. What's he going to keep for himself? The answer was obvious. Block Wargrave was leaving a legacy. At that moment, footsteps sounded behind her. Emily turned sharply and saw her boss behind her. I'm sorry, Damien, it's not what you thought at all. I accidentally bumped the folder, and it fell. She apologized, stuttering on every syllable. Damien grinned and waved his hand. Don't worry, I saw the whole thing. There's a secret room in my office next door, and there's a special peephole with optics that overlooks my desk. Emily gasped in amazement. Why would you do that? Damien shrugged embarrassedly. I wanted to catch my secretary in the act. It's not the first time I've gotten signals about her. I didn't pay much attention to it, but after a recent complaint, I decided to deal with this issue more closely. I've been installing cameras in the walls, and I've learned a lot. But Emily, I'm not accusing you of anything. In fact, congratulations on your inheritance. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. It was the will of the late Block Wargrave. How deceased? Well, Emily whispered with tears in her eyes. Damien nodded sympathetically and put his arm around her shoulders. 2 weeks ago. Again, I'm sorry I didn't let you know. But the last time we met, Block Wargrave wanted to say that he was honoring your mother's memory. She was his best student. It was more than she could bear. Covering her eyes with her hands, Emily cried softly. What she'd been through over the past few months was coming back to haunt her. Damien understood and waited patiently for the despair to subside. This wasn't really how he'd planned the moment of the announcement of the will. But everything turned out the way it did. It was too late to go back. The only thing to do was wait for Emily to calm down. Damien took her home and asked her to stay there for a couple of days to come to her senses and make sense of the situation. He went about the business of his office. First thing he did was fire Angie. He did it without any formalities or negative consequences for her. Damien showed understanding, forgiving all of the mistakes and misdeeds. At the same time, he did not withhold the money, not wanting to make an enemy in her face. Emily began to gradually enter the role of a wealthy heiress and the head of the project to repair the local school. Damien, as a man versed in office and business matters, helped her in any way he could. A month flew by, followed by a second. Despite the generous inheritance, Emily still worked in the notary office. Only now she worked as a secretary, not in a cramped janitor's closet. However, from time to time she still took up the mop to remember the past and clean up the office. Rumor had it that she and Damien were having a torrid affair that threatened to grow into something more than a casual fling. Emily also persuaded him to enter a musical talent contest. At first, Damien didn't believe in success, citing a long break in the game, but when he won second place, he realized that Emily was right. For the first time in his life, he felt like a winner, which meant that everything that had happened before had not happened for nothing. Years of playing the piano had not been in vain for Damien, giving him an unparalleled sense of triumph. Love works wonders, including the pure, sincere love that united the hearts of Emily and Damien to the joy of little Darcy, Matthew, and Alex. And of course, Charlie. Without him, of course. Robert had been surrounded by female attention since kindergarten. The girls tried to be paired with him at matinees, brought him candy and cookies from home, insisted that at quiet time their crib was next to each other. They demanded at home that they bought the most beautiful hairpins for their hair or weave into the braid a brighter colored ribbon. This frenzy never ceased. At school, this state of affairs only worsened. Not by years, a tall boy with dark hair and blue eyes broke the hearts of not only classmates, but also teachers from the fairer sex. They did not raise their hands to reprimand him or lower his grade when his answers were not up to the highest grade. Although his appearance did not resemble the appearance of an angel, he did not look like a demon at all. He was like a stately, humble Greek god with a piercing gaze and an enchanting smile. He didn't speak, but he spoke the words that obediently formed into correct sentences without stuttering. He studied easily, took prizes at Olympiads in all subjects, gallantly asked girls to dance at festive parties, moved amazingly during incendiary discos, turning any music into his obedient servant. Robert and Elizabeth were inseparable almost from the very beginning of their acquaintance. It was useless to drive a wedge between them. The girl moved to this city with the family of her military father. She was laconic in everything: clothes, hairstyle, school bag, pens, and notebooks. When the class wanted to make fun of it, Robert was right there. Somehow it happened that he took under his protection a little girl who stood last in the long row in gym class. The girl with gray eyes, 2 pigtails, tied with black rubber bands, for some reason caused in him a pinch of pity. A lump in his throat stuck. But this little girl was not a bad girl. She pulled the girls back, asking what kind of dense material she was made of. We lived in the north for a long time. In the schools there, they were heated in winter, but we still had to insulate additionally. Do you want to talk about it? The curious people backed off at once. What's the point of getting involved with someone like that? It's not worth it. She's too quick with her tongue. Robert grinned to himself and invited Elizabeth to sit at the same desk with him. It's free. I usually sit alone. You'll be comfortable. You can see the blackboard. It's the penultimate desk in this row by the window. In his soul, he had not yet settled in Elizabeth's address romantic notes, but he always wanted to take care of her like some young, helpless puppy. At home, he had a beagle given to him just at that time for his birthday. He had dreamed of a sheepdog, but their apartment would not support such a large dog. Here in their family, an appeared mischievous cute beagle, a faithful friend, selflessly loving later their masters and completely unpretentious in care. the sweetest companion with soft ears and a long tail. Robert was unusually patient with his parents, cuddling and nurturing him all the time. Suddenly he realized that Elizabeth was more than just a friend, companion, and sister in spirit to him. When she badly shattered her knees one winter when she fell on the ice, they were already in 8th grade at the time. From a small, graceful statue, Elizabeth began to turn into a petite young lady with the crushes inherent in her young age. The girl was incredibly stubborn. She dragged him home after school across a smooth, vacant lot prepared for digging foundations for a new building. "Don't go, Robert, it'll be 5 minutes before we're home. It's too long and uninteresting to walk around that fence, especially in this weather," she urged. He'd fallen for her pleas. Now she was sitting on the cold ground with her tights torn to shreds and deep lacerations on her knees, stumbled over pieces of rebar left behind by who knows who. He didn't hesitate long, picked her up in his arms and carried her to his house where no one was present. In the apartment he treated the wounds, which after he had washed away all the blood with peroxide, did not seem so horrible anymore. They were 14 years old. Hormones were certainly starting to rage in their bodies by now, but they weren't what made him kiss her lap near the wounds. Tenderness nudged him gently. She wasn't frightened. She leaned over, hugged his head, and nuzzled the top of his head. "Robert, are you scared? It's okay. You've got tea in the house or something to go with it, haven't you?" "I'm starving. I'll never make it home," she laughed. From that day on, they kissed each other on the cheek when they met. They walked mostly hugging now, but without any hint of closer proximity. Peer girls were ready to wipe Robert in powder for the fact that Robert did not notice anyone around, but they did not dare to do any harm. Only sometimes they let out barbs. But the young couple could do nothing. Even stain their friendship could not, so pure and light it was. In the graduating class, everything suddenly changed. Both grew up and could no longer ignore the natural laws of nature. Robert realized that this was his first love. She was not a whim or a temporary eclipse brought on by young age. This girl had firmly established herself in his heart. It happens that even handsome men belong to the clan of those who meet their only woman once and are faithful to love her afterward for a lifetime. Let someone try to argue that this is a fairy tale. After school, both entered the university, he at the Faculty of Physics and she at the Faculty of Economics. In the educational institution on Robert again began the hunt. Having gone through the crucible of naive passions at school, Elizabeth and Robert did not even cast a glance at his admirers, and they, like snakes, hissed back. "Where's he ever been? He's at least in Hollywood, starring in a movie instead of Richard Gere. They can't be together. It's absurd." In one of the lectures in my freshman year, I was amused by a scene. The subject was common history. Different departments listened to it together, without division into physicists, chemists, geographers, and economists. Among the female students, as usual, was its star, its first beauty, its prima donna. She had bet with her fellow students that she would steal Robert away from Elizabeth in no time. She was counting on her striking looks. Men on the streets would crane their necks when they saw her in the crowd. She didn't mince words with the guy. She just sat down on his lap without even giving him a second thought. In front of the student crowd, not at all embarrassed. Robert didn't bother to embarrass the arrogant person. With an expression as if he had touched a nasty toad, he took her by the shoulder with 2 fingers and pulled her off his lap. "Don't ever do that again. My heart is occupied. It's about time you all realize that." Belle was taken aback. "Are you talking about that roof that's always dangling beneath your feet? Don't make us all laugh. What could you possibly have in common with her?" Robert's blue eyes filled with an angry glint. "Thank you, my girlfriend can't hear you right now. But the rest of us should know that behind your beautiful shell hides an evil heart that knows no true feelings. You're nothing. I don't envy anyone who would give their soul to you. You'd trample it for nothing." After these words, the curious crowd parted and Elizabeth came up. Robert calmly put his arm around her shoulders and said, "Come, let us sit in the other row. There's a foul smell of meanness here. I hate that insidious odor." Elizabeth did not understand anything, but she did not argue with him, as was her custom. Her man was young. That was a fact, but always very sensible. If he said so, there was some truth in it, however strange. He had also announced to her parents 6 months ago, in the same cavalier manner, "Elizabeth and I love each other, and that's forever. We'll quarrel a little at university, and then we'll get married. Our decision is not subject to appeal, so all arguments are canceled in advance." Both families lived modestly. Parents couldn't afford a separate place for their children. Therefore, at a general family meeting before the modest wedding, it was decided that Robert and Elizabeth would marry after the 3rd year of study, when the university begins training in a narrow professional profile. So they did. Further in their life, everything was very similar to the life of other families. They did not grab stars from the sky in material terms. At the end of their 5th year, Joan's firstborn was born. 3 years later, Catherine. Just like to write a classic saga, married, have produced 2 children, dreaming of a 3rd child. The search for women around Robert persistently continued. Even the boss of his mother's colleague laid her eyes on him. In his office hung his portrait. He invited the door on the key immediately locked in his fashion attire. Shows of new collections of local tailoring sometimes happened. The place specialized in men's clothing. The walking mannequin was a left-handed kid. The catch was that the audience immediately recognized his unconventional orientation. The audience started laughing. And then Robert caught the eye of the businesswoman. "We don't want such a nature to go to waste. And we don't want such a nature to go to waste. Young men only dress up, and the butterflies will no longer choose suits for clients, and this miracle to admire." Catch a Guy decided to catch a high fee, which intended to also include services of a personal nature for herself and defile on the runway for business. When I told Robert the salary, he couldn't believe his ears. "What kind of accomplishments? You offer me a salary 5 times more than my mother, a seamstress with vast experience." The woman once again assessed him from head to toe. "You seem like a big boy, bigger than some. I don't need to explain it to you. If you are obedient, I will buy you an apartment, a car, fancy rags, accessories. I will take you to restaurants and hotels. I will teach you to have an elite vacation at the seaside. You'll travel with me a couple times a year. Isn't that a tempting prospect?" "I think you misunderstood me." Robert removed her hand. "I'm not the one to make that kind of offer. Find yourself another easygoing boy, and don't let my refusal to get back at my mother make you regret it." The incident was over. The lady didn't bother him anymore. After her, there was a smashing master of men's haircuts. She kept trying to press up against him during the process of fighting with his unruly hair. He was so accustomed for his short life to such outbursts from the female sex that he never paid any attention to them. Nor were the pretenders to his heart offended. He was too good-looking. It's a sin to be angry with such a man. Robert, even in the university, disappointed in applied physics. It wasn't the way he'd envisioned it at school. All the 4th and 5th year in the evenings he went, as if on the 2nd shift, to the liquor factory to work part-time. They just loaded the finished product for shipment to the regions, and they lived in a rented apartment. There was a new monetary unit, 1 gun, or 1/2 liter for stronger drinks. Jokes are jokes, but Jennifer and Robert themselves were indifferent to alcohol. But they used it actively as gifts to a plumber for replacing a faucet, to an electrician for repairing the wiring. Robert was constantly missing at work. During the day he worked as a design engineer at a machine building plant, and in the evenings a loader. Jennifer sat with the children, smoothly transitioning from one maternity leave to another. She had not yet applied her talents in economics. They lived amicably. Robert got along with his wife's parents, Jennifer with his parents. The usual family unit. That seemed to be the end of their story. But would fate let them go without a trial? They were waiting for a loving couple. And what a couple. The attack of severe pain in his back caught Robert in the evening. It was a cold winter at home. He was still working at the liquor factory. Times were tough. Although Jennifer had put her eldest son in kindergarten, the younger Catherine constantly demanded attention and was often unreasonably cranky. It was impossible to go outside with her in cold weather. Pulling pain with periodic sharp jabs in the area of the spine forced the man to go to the doctors. There he first heard a new word that became a diagnosis: hernia. As he understood from the doctor's words, it was about problems with the spine and discs. The doctors assured him that if he took care and did not lift heavy weights, everything would be fine with constant monitoring. He would live happily ever after. So Robert had to say goodbye to loading and unloading for now, a source of money. The financial situation of the family is somewhat shaken, and Catherine has not outgrown childhood colds, constantly either sniffling or coughing. District pediatrician strongly advised to take the girl in the summer to the sea, preferably for a couple of months. Otherwise, she would also be sick at school. Elizabeth, of course, found it impossible to go to the sea with only one daughter. It was out of the question financially to have a vacation with the four of them. The solution was to choose the lesser of two evils. Go to the sea with the three of us and the children. Robert somehow in 2 months will get out to them at least for a weekend. That's how the three of them went to the more or less democratic Anapa. Robert stayed home to do chores. Since some time a new tenant had settled in their house, a woman in her 40s, the owner of several clothing stores in the city. She moved into an apartment in a remote neighborhood, she said, so that the eyes of her husband, after a high-profile divorce, did not see her. The clever husband tried to sue half of the business from her, and the case with boutiques she created and developed herself. As she liked to quote the hero of the movie, Ivan Vasilievich changes profession by hard labor. Andrei and the yard-bright lady immediately noticed. And he seemed to her so flawless that she immediately wanted to participate in his fate. She invited him to work for her. Engineer, physicist, and fashionable business, two parallel planes. But surprisingly, he did well. His machine-building plant was living its last days. The technological lines were obsolete. No one, not even the most talented designer, could come up with anything ingenious to get this enterprise back on its feet. And the neighbor needed an assistant with decent looks, who could charm the partners with charisma and impeccable manners. Robert was perfect for this role. As for his wife, she just needed a deputy with an ideal reputation as a model family man. Her chain of stores was called Family. It stood for 7 friendly eyes. They sold clothes for men and women, as well as for children. Michael was very skeptical of her suggestion. He laughed, "Where am I with my technical education? And where are the clothes, new collections, all this glitter and tinsel of rags and accessories?" Jacqueline, on the other hand, was not so adamant. "Michael, do you underestimate yourself? Each of us should be willing to sell what we have in abundance. In your case, it's God-given beauty, so why not turn it into a popular commodity for the sake of your well-being? Let's just give it a try. A month's work with me won't cost you anything." He walked home and thought wistfully, nothing will come of this collaboration. She will again start looking for ways to get closer to me. And for me, such an option is impossible. The man was wrong. Jacqueline was a much wiser and more astute woman. She already had a young and strong companion for her health, but he was not smart enough to be seen with him in public, and her firm needed a male face. She used herself as a female face. What was missing was an idyllic image, an assistant with an impeccable reputation. Michael agreed to the experiment. Especially at the factory, everyone was on leave without pay for an indefinite period of time. Time was passing. Soon his family would return from the sea, and the house was empty. He couldn't make any money while his loved ones were improving their health on the coast. Jacqueline taught him the science of being, not appearing to negotiate patiently, to watch his speech, to dress tastefully even for a little money, to be able to maintain a conversation on any topic. She persistently dragged him along to all business meetings and brought him into her circle. After a couple of weeks, Michael calmed down. Jacqueline did not make any attempts. She diligently molded him into an enterprising business partner who is not lost in any commercial situation, will calculate ahead of all the moves, will increase the accumulated, save previously achieved. When Elizabeth returned home, she did not recognize Robert. At the train station, they were met by a respectable man in a strict, elegant suit, matching shirt, stylish tie. From surprise, she could not restrain irony. Where did such a handsome uncle come from? Then she rushed towards him and hung on her lover's neck. No, you told me, of course, that you changed your job. But I could not imagine that the change in you would be so radical. At home, in a clean apartment, Elizabeth and the children were waiting for a set table, new toys, items of clothing, bought by the head of the family as a gift. It would be a happy life. But insidious envy is always around. In a barrel of honey finds a spoonful of tar. The range of Robert's duties included not only labor everyday life, but also accompanying the owner of the stores, Jacqueline, to corporate events held in her company and at the enterprises of colleagues in the trade. For some time now, Jacqueline had been obsessed with the idea of expanding the chain with 2 new department stores. She suddenly wanted families to be able to shop in her facility entirely without leaving the buildings and retail space. She was already negotiating for furniture. But even that didn't seem enough for her. In her dreams, she saw people coming into her realm for the day. In addition to non-food items, peeking into retail outlets with a large assortment of high-end products from farmers and private owners. Then it's off to a cafe, a pastry shop, to celebrate successful purchases with drinks and sweets. She even found such a chef that she believed in success in advance. His handmade cakes and pastries were amazing. Even adherents of eternal diets could not resist and sat down at the table with everyone. The business promised to be very profitable and promising. Only one obstacle hindered these endeavors. An official from the city administration did not want to put her signature on the authorization documents for operation. She was an impenetrable old-school aunt with no visible weaknesses. Jacqueline went all out, pulling in all her connections. But the case was stalled. Robert's boss was quite desperate, but then she learned a thing that made her hair stand on end. It turns out that the Iron Lady secretly liked to play, went to neighboring cities to indulge her passion for gambling away from the prying eyes of fellow countrymen. Moreover, she was very fortunate in this vice of hers. The owners of gambling houses were afraid of her appearance. Luck did not leave her for long, constantly increasing her secret capital, but no one tried to prevent her. After all, Madame was from the highest echelon of power at the local level and could close gambling establishments with a single movement of the hand. Having learned such sensational news, Jacqueline immediately decided to give Robert a delicate assignment. She will hire a private detective to find out what kind of places this lady likes to visit. Robert will casually get acquainted with her and try to get dirt in the form of photos and videos of her game. Yes, it wasn't the most ethical way to get the lady to back off. Jacqueline didn't like it herself. But what else was there to do? In the fight against the enemy, all means are good, even such a sneak attack. The preparations for the operation went smoothly. For a good fee, the secretary of the administrative lady leaked the information that she had taken a few days of vacation at work at her own expense. All indications were that she was going on a trip to one of the cities where she could indulge in gambling. After tracing where the train tickets had been bought, Robert was sent on a business trip. He only joked. "You've made a commercial spy out of me? You've got addresses, passwords, where to go and who to introduce myself as. The only thing left to do is to glue on a mustache and a beard for conspiracy. And then we can go on the job." One thing he didn't tell anyone. Robert took home all his savings, saved for a rainy day, to try his luck next to his lucky aunt. Moreover, he borrowed a large sum from the head of security at Jacqueline's office. It never occurred to anyone that he was playing with his luck, and he'd had a large drink of whiskey at the bar beforehand. Robert sat at the table next to the lady from the administration and was terribly angry. She bet on one number or the other, chose black or red color, and almost always won at least a small amount of money. He, on the other hand, lost every last dime. All the promises of beginner's luck turned out to be nothing, and he was never lucky. The waiter kept bringing him whiskey on the rocks. His head was getting heavier and heavier. He had forgotten all about his mission. At some point, his patience broke. He rose abruptly from the table, pushing away the waiter who was just about to pour him another drink. With a hard look at his lucky neighbor, he shouted, "Fuck you and your administrative capabilities. I'm here almost in my underpants camera carried to film you at the game, and you do not give a damn. It's all ha 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 until you've had enough." It was a scandal. Security instantly searched it and found hidden cameras and recorders. The official threw the money and instantly disappeared from the hall, not forgetting to grab the winnings. Jacqueline could not forgive Robert for the failure of the operation. That powerful lady couldn't. With some inner instinct, she realized who was so interested in collecting dirt on her. Jacqueline's dream of creating a nice shopping and entertainment centers crumbled into small shards. Now, when she met Robert in the yard, she didn't even say hello, deliberately averting her face. Robert came home like a beaten dog. The family piggy bank was empty. A servant from Jacqueline's entourage hinted to him that he would not wait long for the loan to be repaid. He would soon put him on the meter and follow him everywhere. At the machine factory, where Robert had a small position, they were not going to start the lines. Thoughts swirled in his head that his ex-wife was wrong. Where to sell beauty if no one in this world wants it? Only at the distillery did he have all the peace and serenity. Maybe he is weak, worthless head of the family, not capable of anything in this life. By all accounts, it appeared that his only dignity, loyalty, and devotion to his beloved woman. But he had nothing to feed her and the children. His feet carried him to the glass rows of vodka and liquor bottles. Where he had worked before, he could be useful. Why, his back was aching by evening, and he would bear it. His wife needn't know how he earned every penny. Soon tales are told and deeds are done. Usually within 2 years of working at the liquor factory, the family's financial situation has improved. Son Joan and daughter Catherine already went to school. Elizabeth found a job as a cashier in a small company. The salary was meager, but she could pick up her children after school, take them to classes, feed them at home properly, and check their lessons without rushing. The globe was spinning on its axis. The years went by slowly. The next bright burst in the career of 30-year-old Robert happened as if by magic. Apparently, the heavens took pity on his monotonous, like Groundhog Day, life. By that time, he had not bothered to find a more decent job. He remained infantile and uninitiative in this respect. He had little faith that there would be any change in his professional destiny. Elizabeth was tired of convincing him that Jacqueline's education and his looks could have been a good match for him. But he had been dealing with money debts for so long that he had always avoided any career opportunities, as if they were the hot milk of failure, potentially shaking his temporary well-being. Further events unfolded as follows. Robert's home liquor company began bottling a new line of elite liqueurs. In such cases, one cannot do without advertising, which the management did. In one of the pleasant spring days, the factory yard was filled with unusual noise. A commotion began. A crowd of curious people gathered. It's not every day that a real movie is shot in front of your eyes, a whole series of reels. Rumor has it that even billboards will be prepared. "See how the bosses have splurged," whispered in the crowd. The workers must have had high hopes for those chocolate and coffee liqueurs. "They're too sweet for us, too sweet, too sweet. They say they're aristocratic drinks for the ladies. But for us it's all the same, as long as the advance payment and wages are paid on time." To the surprise of the audience, An ugly scene played out right in front of their eyes. Some actor of the local theater suddenly got into a pose and began to argue with the director and cameraman. "Why didn't you tell me at once that you had to present ladies' goods? This you spoil my whole image of brutality, my reputation as a macho on stage and on the screen. Find him among the workers, someone with a face, and shoot him on your billboards." "What kind of whimsy is that?" echoed him in the tone of a confused director. "Where will I find a suitable texture here? They all have matchstick faces. Well, how with such a hot drink? It's a Klondike to work next to them." The workers looked at each other resentfully. The sight was no longer languid, and they immediately became offended. "You insult us, my man. You insult us, my man. Our beauties have their own glamour. Your acting is no match for his." There he is. Robert was passing by on his way to the dining room for lunch. He never liked noisy spectacles, so he tried to stay away from the performance organized by advertising specialists at the factory. But curiosity, as always, won out. The director was a master of shooting commercials. They could use an extra, even a popular model with a fresh face. The reality exceeded all his expectations. Past the improvised set was such a handsome man of 35 years that the director in the first moments dumbfounded, then quickly pulled himself together and asked to follow him and sprint. It would be a big mistake to miss such material. "A man? Yes, you, I'm talking to you. Could you slow down a bit? I can't keep up with you," he said. "To what do I owe?" Robert stared at him with his impossible blue eyes. "I don't have such a long lunch break, and there are long lines in the cafeteria." The director looked him over once more from head to toe. Oh, what a good-looking man. His breed, his manners, his impeccable masculine figure, his correct facial features, seasoned with charisma. He was ready to pinch himself on the arm. Such Hollywood standards with snow-white teeth can't just walk around an old-fashioned distillery unperturbed. "Yes, he doesn't seem to know the price of his appearance," thought the director, and said aloud, "Would you agree to help us out?" Inner instinct of advertising business master for some reason immediately realized that to promise this man a golden mountain from the jump is not worth it. Here it is necessary to press on pity, to emphasize the failure of deadlines, on friendship and mutual assistance, to tell about the deadlocked situation with the actor suddenly refusing to shoot, as in the water looked. At first, Robert did not want to hear about any filming, heartily laughed in response to compliments of his beauty and relevance. "I have already once tried to sell my appearance as a marketable commodity. Nothing good came out of it. Somehow I do not want to go again in such experiments." "Do not chop from the shoulder," tried to press on the pity of the director. "If we had not had unforeseen circumstances, I would not have persuaded you now. You'd be a great help to us if you'd agree to do at least a billboard movie." Robert shuddered when he heard the amount of the fee he was being offered. The director decided not to be stingy, not to save money on a debutante. The man thought that this amount could be enough for a small trip to the sea for the four of us. Soon summer vacations. The children could use such an opportunity. 2 weeks later, huge billboards were hung all over the city, on which Robert drank liquor with the lady of his heart. Her role in the photo was played by a young student of the theater school, pretty as a rosebud in her youthful charm. Both looked at each other with such love, holding shot glasses of chocolate liqueur, that there was no doubt. There it was, the cause of the romantic mood lurking at the bottom of the elegant vessels. Sales of the liquor increased dramatically. The director rubbed his hands and waited for the release of commercials. In them, the sweet couple also starred brilliantly. He was very pleased with the photo, talent, and unexpected ability of Robert not to look in the frame stiff. That's the kind of guy the camera loves. After the launch of the videos, Robert began to be recognized on the street, and the products of the factory began to be ordered to other regions. Women looked at the colorful picture and demanded that their men urgently try the magic drink. The fees of 2 random models increased many times over. In the office of the director, more and more often began to hear phone calls. Rising star, shown in a successful commercial, suddenly urgently needed in his colleagues. But he firmly kept the situation under control, took on the production of commercials advertising men's perfume, and then sportswear. Before, Robert faced a dilemma to stay to work as a loader at his native distillery, or to listen to the advice of the new boss and go into the advertising business. The scale was outweighed by a vacation. This time they were able to go on vacation, all 4 of them. Elizabeth and the children were over the moon. Robert even stopped paying attention to more and more often arising in his back pain until he did not disrupt another shooting. He went to the hospital with a severe attack of intervertebral hernia. Life apart from him flowed in its own way. Good they were now, as they call it, with money, could afford to undergo a medical examination in a private clinic. The doctor's conclusion this time was not so rosy. His work as a loader had done its job. His professional trauma had turned into a herniated disc. Robert had to spend a month in the clinic. Through the efforts of therapeutic exercise, drips, and skillful actions of the medical staff, doctors brought him back into action. Before discharge, they admonished him forget forever about heavy physical exertion, even medium, sharp movements of the body. Otherwise, next time you will find yourself right on the operating table. The verdict was final, not subject to appeal. The director met his favorite with open arms. The man no longer worked for him on the Bird's rights of the model, which occasionally invited to revitalize some video. Unexpectedly, Robert once proposed an innovative technical idea, then the next. Now he not only starred in his, at first seemingly fantastic, developments based on the laws of applied physics, but also came up with more and more new solutions. After he was hospitalized, the company somehow drastically reduced its management, drew conclusions. It was time to offer their talented generator of ideas a solid place in the executive chair. In the active labors on the advertising field, Robert did not even notice how the whole 5 years flew by. Joan has already had time to finish school. There was another significant event from a clumsy teenager. Resembling an ugly duckling, he suddenly turned into a copy of his father. Only his eyes were gray, huge, like Elizabeth's. History repeated itself. The guy was adored by all the classmates and girls from other schools, except that he didn't have his dad's stamina for attention from the female sex. He changed girlfriends like gloves, broke hearts carelessly, in passing, often forgetting the names and appearance of casual companions for one night. Robert and Elizabeth only had their heads in their hands. Joan heeded none of their exhortations. Preds. What do you know, honestly? I don't care how many girls I've had and how many more I'll have. They hang on me in bunches. Why should I deny myself the pleasure? I'm not going to go to school like you. I've already chosen the advertising department, which trains PR managers. I'll approach my dad's current business with more modern technology. But if I'm also invited to do a movie, it'll only be better. Fame will find its hero, or heroes. Joan wasn't your typical narcissist. At first he was shocked that so many members of the fair sex follow him in droves. He laughed. I should take another shower. Is it in the maternity hospital? Or is it smeared for them? He was bombarded in social networks with offers, and in real-life notes and invitations to parties and picnics, youth parties and nightclubs, or to his home. Times have changed, he told his parents. You're like mammoths. Your views on fidelity, no cheating, are outdated. Robert and Elizabeth did not push him too much, did not bring him up, did not hurry him to settle down, to meet his one and only woman. Let him go out for the time being. It's a young thing, they decided. They were now much more concerned about an unexpected problem that loomed on the horizon. Their daughter Catherine had just turned 15. It was time to think about her future profession. The girl's mind was filled with illusions and fantasies. She decided to become an actress and went to the theater club for the second year. Last week, a friend of the teacher who works as a choirmaster, unexpectedly came to the class. She was interested in Catherine, who was performing a simple song from the play at the rehearsal. The woman was impressed by her voice and took her parents' contacts. Later, she found Robert and Elizabeth, met with them, and was shocked by the news. "Your girl has an extraordinary, rare vocal gift. I listened to her in detail after that chance meeting. It would be a crime if you didn't give her music and vocal training. Who knows? Maybe we're looking at a future great opera singer." Robert and Elizabeth stared at her. Yes, the choral specialist nodded. "You heard right. Your daughter has a unique voice which now looks like a rough diamond that will become a magnificent diamond." "But Catherine is already 15 years old," Elizabeth said thoughtfully. "Isn't it too late for her to learn music and singing?" The choirmaster smiled slyly. "It's never too late to become a singer, or to learn anything at all. It's strange that you didn't notice that your daughter has such a beautiful voice." Yes, singing never really stood out in front of them. Robert tried to explain his ignorance. "Only at matinees in kindergarten. And later her singing I will not remember." The girl saw her vocation in another, remembered herself in the theater, in the cinema as an actress, hastened to dispel his doubts. "Woman. And the decision, of course, you. But if I were you, I would buy a piano without delay and devote all her free time to vocal lessons. I'll find the necessary specialists for such a gifted child. I look forward to your call." The piano for Catherine was bought the following week. It's expensive and very beautiful. It's beautiful to look at and play on. Robert personally supervised the loading and unloading of the instrument. He was afraid that the movers would do something wrong. On the platform of the third floor, it seemed to the man that the workers were about to drop their purchase. What's holding this enormous thing on its sides? It's awkward, unstable, he thought. Robert lunged forward, picked up the piano from the side so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands, and immediately slid to the floor. His eyes went black with pain, and he could hardly move. The movers frightenedly surrounded the client. One of them rushed to the 5th floor to call Elizabeth. The ambulance arrived quickly. At the hospital, the doctors only shook their heads. Too rapid turn of the body, trying to pick up a heavy instrument, did their job. Robert's condition could only be improved by surgery, for which the man immediately began to prepare. It was entrusted to a young, ambitious surgeon, Madison. Already in an hour, she came to get acquainted with her new patient and froze. He was so handsome. Madison, as is often the case in academic and career circles, had shown great promise since medical school. Her father was a brilliant surgeon, and her mother was an equally savvy operating gynecologist. The girl was already accustomed from childhood in the house to constant medical conversations and discussions. Other future as to join the family dynasty, for herself did not see. Personal life, at a rather pretty young woman, did not add up. Robert and Madison were a college couple who had married hastily, but soon divorced after a few carefree relationships. By the age of 30, Madison was left with a bad experience and a burning desire to make things right. She fell in love with Robert at first sight. He scheduled the surgery in 5 days. Madison went to work on her residency in confusion. She had a picture in front of her eyes, snow-white bedding, dark hair with barely visible sagebrush on the pillow, and startling blue eyes filled with pain. She'll make this man smile and forget his ailment. Or is she not a first-rate surgeon? And then there's his wife, Jacqueline, who's always getting underfoot. A gray mouse with big gray eyes. What could they possibly have in common? After all, they'd been living together for quite a while. The grown children came to visit their father. Madison grinned wryly. Can't push the wife away. I'm on night duty tomorrow. I'll take the bull by the horns as soon as my patient starts thinking and feeling better after the anesthetic. That day and the next seemed endless to her. She ran to Robert under any pretext, touched his forehead with a cool palm, listened to his lungs for some reason. The patient was indifferent to all her manipulations, reviving only when his wife appeared in the room. Nothing, my darling Madison thought. You don't know yet what a surprise I've prepared for myself. By evening the next day, the surgical ward was nearly empty by evening. Elizabeth was going home too. There were some things to be done there. Robert's surgery was coming up soon. After it, she would be with him 24 hours a day for the first time. The children's meals have to be cooked, the house cleaned, the laundry done. Robert is feeling a little better so far. Now all that's left is to get through the surgery. Madison waited until Robert was alone. When all was quiet, she went to his room, where he was alone. The man was dozing uneasily. She snuck under the covers to the patient. The man flinched in surprise and stared at her with uncomprehending eyes. "What's going on here? How did you get here? What do you want?" Robert asked excitedly. "Relax, Robert," his doctor whispered in his ear in a different voice. "I like you a lot. Too much." But Robert felt only rejection, squeamishness, disgust. "Are you crazy, Madison? I didn't give you any preferential treatment. I didn't hint. I didn't seek your favor. I love and respect my wife Jacqueline too much to even have such thoughts." Such an invasion of his personal territory was beyond his moral comprehension. So he pressed the button to call the nursing staff. Soon a nurse appeared in the room. Her eyes rounded at the scene she had uncovered. Madison was huddled like a snake in the restroom. The man was still looking around fearfully. After calming him down, the nurse snidely asked the doctor on duty, "Madison, do you need my help or can I go?" There was no response. The woman in the restroom remained silent. A little while later, she quietly walked out of there. Turning around, she gritted her teeth. "You'll remember this concert. No one has ever humiliated me like that." Passing by the post, the duty nurse could not help but notice the ironic smile of her colleague. Tomorrow the whole department would know about the night incident. Madison had no doubt about that. So she kept a low profile for the remaining days before the surgery. She kept thinking of one idea. Robert did not say a word, did not show anything that could arouse suspicion in his wife about the night incident. He didn't want to upset her with such trivialities. He was polite but cold to Madison. The day of the surgery was finally set for tomorrow. The meeting with the doctor had already taken place, only Elizabeth was a little nervous. After all, she hadn't sung for a long time, and tomorrow she had scheduled an extremely important meeting with 2 vocal teachers at once. Robert only laughed at Elizabeth's fears. "The surgery is elective, not the most complicated, while I'm under anesthesia on the table. You'll have just enough time to meet with everyone and talk things over," Robert said. "It's about the future of our daughter, Catherine. You have to be with me, and I'll be transferred to the intensive care unit first. You will come closer to the evening, when you have solved all the questions about the training of our young talent." That was the deal. Surgery to remove a herniated disc in the lumbar spine was not something unusual for Madison, so all her movements were honed to automaticity. She was a surgical professional who knew exactly what she could and could not do. Glimpse once again admiring the beautiful face of the patient, she gave the command to the assistants to serve something, bring something, and herself touched the nerve endings at the site of the operation so that no one noticed. In the protocol of manipulation of this nuance, Madison did not enter. After congratulating her colleagues on the end of the operation, she told the orderlies to bring Robert into the intensive care unit to observe the exit from anesthesia. A reaction to her experiment was to follow later. That was okay. She would wait. She was patient. At 3 a.m., she got a call from the ICU. "Madison, your patient is awake, but he can't feel his legs. Madison, come to us right away. We don't understand why there's such a serious complication." Stupid, the woman grinned to herself. "I paralyzed him on the operating table forever. but you will never know why he is paralyzed. That secret will go to the grave with me, because a woman cannot be cornered by unthinkable humiliation. No one dares to reject me, not even such a handsome man. Madison searched her soul diligently and found not a shred of pity for her patient. What's more, she only now remembered how she knew the man so well. He was the guy who'd graced billboards around town when her mom was into chocolate liquor. And her victim turns out to be a screen star. So much the worse for him. Now his business will be over. How weird is that? Didn't she take the Hippocratic Oath, which includes do no harm? Madison immediately answered herself, I took an oath as a future doctor, and his nerve endings were touched by an offended woman. Now, your inviolable marriage, Mr. Plotnitsky, will you touch? I'll see how long it will take you both to portray the eternal, faithful to each other Tristan and Isolde. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was rushing to the hospital to Robert with good news. She had managed to arrange for piano and vocal lessons with both teachers. Already tomorrow, Catherine would begin to make up for lost time to prepare for admission to the music school. Her daughter was pleased. Joan was a parasite, he kept laughing. What a parasite. But it's going to happen. We now have our own Maria Callas or Montserrat Cabal in the family, he said, laughing. Then the three of them laughed contagiously, drank tea with scones and cherry jam, discussed that soon Robert would return, and life would go on as usual. Then the children went about their business, and Elizabeth hurried to Robert's house, remembering to bring some goodies for him. At the clinic, putting on a robe, the woman already approached her husband's room, where he was transferred from the intensive care unit. But then she heard the nurses whispering, Lord, why should such a beautiful man be punished by God? I cleaned his floors, and he lies like a statue. Recently he was taken down from the intensive care unit. He can't feel half of his torso from below. What a grief for the family. Elizabeth's legs gave out and she flopped down on the couch. It can't be. What are they saying about Robert? That there are no other handsome men in the hospital. He's the only one having surgery today. Her head rumbled, soothing thoughts. But the heart couldn't lie. It knew the truth, and it bled like a wounded animal. Something had gone wrong for her husband Robert today. Fate had handed down a sentence that could not be reversed. Robert's condition had not changed a bit in a day, a month, or a year. During that time, he and Elizabeth had gone through several stages of acceptance. First, the man was in sullen despair, then in prostration, then in anger at the circumstances. He shouted at Elizabeth, "You must leave me. It is not proper for a woman of 40 to sleep in a cold bed. You realize I'm not a man anymore." Elizabeth reacted to his outbursts in different ways. She cried or, on the contrary, laughed, said that this is nothing, that this is not the main thing in the relationship between a man and a woman. She found new arguments for her husband. Robert, for a while, seemed to calm down. But inside he still did not agree with her, as it seemed to him, unnecessary devotion. He thought that she was burying her feminine nature, took on an impossible burden. He would surely figure out a way to free her from that heavy cross. Madison got off lightly at work. There was a meeting to analyze the actions of everyone involved in that unfortunate operation. Independent experts reviewed the entire protocol of the surgical procedure in detail. They found no medical errors. The patient's complications were attributed to his personal physiologic peculiarities. Madison continued to work in the department, even without a reprimand or reprimands in her file, as if nothing had happened. Only the nurse on duty that night, when the surgeon unusually visited Robert's room, suddenly decided to change her job. She found a position as head nurse on Madison's father's ward. Such a happy coincidence. The girl was smart, and she wouldn't talk about what she'd seen. Only Madison hinted that it was strange how everything with the patient turned out, at the right time in the right place. She didn't have a problem with it. All the more reason for her to feel like she'd overstayed her welcome in the ranks. A nurse with her experience would like to find a bigger position. The two women, Elizabeth and Jacqueline, understand each other and agree. Not long after the heated scandals and Robert's attempts to talk Elizabeth into a divorce, their home became suspiciously quiet and calm. The man was increasingly digging with some blueprints, inventing something. At work in an advertising company, given his early merits, such trouble was left for him. The place of a freelance technical development consultant was formalized on a remote mode and faithfully paid a small allowance called salary. Elizabeth was still working in her small firm, but as an economist. The salary was low, and her savvy helped. Back when Robert was in favor, smiling at everyone from every other billboard in town, she saved some money, put it in the bank for a long time at a fairly high interest rate. There was enough for bread and butter, and even sometimes their favorite blackcurrant jam. With entertainment, Catherine had to temper her appetite a little. But the children loved their father so much that they took it for granted, so there were no serious material worries in the family. After a couple of months of hard work, Robert asked Elizabeth to invite his colleague Michael to dinner. He explained that he and Michael have long had a warm friendship, so he wants to ask him to help with the launch of a new invention in the shooting of commercials. We had a good time. We recalled funny incidents from the life of the native company. Michael lamented that the face of the advertising kingdom could disappear from the screen, and then long asked Robert to take one and another pose. He gave his resume later. My profession as a cameraman taught me to shoot people in a variety of angles. You've become even more photogenic, Robert. There's something in your eyes. So now we have to base our commercials on your close-ups. It'll be an even bigger success, I guarantee it. Michael was not the least bit mistaken. Advertising office furniture, in which Robert filmed in a huge office improvised boss, the public was accepted by the hurrah. Respectable and dressed with needle, a very handsome man with intelligent eyes created the image of an ideal boss who wants to obey unconditionally. And no one needed to know how to shoot immobilized Robert, laying cushions in the high luxurious chair of a modern manager. After the first experience began to appear other orders. Former magnitude in them was not, but decent money for the family to earn quite well received. Robert, as before, came up with some interesting additions to the technical equipment of the situation in the frame. Everything together made their commercials in demand on the advertising market. Elizabeth breathed a little sigh of relief that her husband had abandoned his idea that they should get a divorce. At least he wasn't having any more unpleasant conversations on the subject. Robert was troubled by something else. After that dinner at their home, he noticed with what sympathy Michael is interested in his wife's affairs, secretly asking him how she is doing. Goes casually on the street when Elizabeth comes to pick up Robert from the shooting. A slightly wild plan was growing and solidifying in Robert's mind. He decided to let his wife go so she could live life to the fullest again. For the cause took zealously, and became even closer to the handsome cameraman, and began to often invite him to the house. On various far-fetched occasions encouraged his attention to his wife. A woman's heart is not a stone. Elizabeth, who had long been ignorant of other people's attention from cavaliers, was susceptible to Michael's behavior. He carried flowers, candy, and fruit to her every time, as if he were courting her. When was the last time she had a date in her life? Over 20 years ago, and now she was living in a cocoon of constant moral fatigue. No, she thought. I have not fallen out of love with my dear Robert. I have always been faithful to him. But sometimes one wants spring in one's soul so much. It is so hard to give up its blooming signs that promise joy. Robert at all these meetings between the three of them was as unperturbed as an iceberg. He pretended not to see that around him hovering love vibes from Michael, and Elizabeth is often embarrassed and does not know how to behave. Moreover, when the advertising company has a loud corporate party, he suddenly said he was sick, complaining of severe back pain. When Michael began to persuade Elizabeth not to miss such an interesting event, suddenly came to life, fussed, began to prove to his wife that she must have fun this evening. And then only supermarkets, pharmacies, nowhere to go. At the party, where for once Elizabeth dressed up in her best cocktail dresses, no one cared about her and Michael. People were enjoying champagne and stronger drinks, snacking from baskets, salad boxes, and desserts. Elizabeth and Michael did a lot of dancing. Elizabeth felt a little dizzy. How long had it been since she'd had a close relationship? A year? 2, 3? She had already lost count, trying never to think about it. After a soulful evening, they didn't take a cab. They decided to take a short walk along the promenade. Elizabeth soon got cold, so Michael threw his jacket over her shoulders and tried to hug her. She rejected his attempt. This conversation is not working, Michael thought. I love you, Elizabeth. Suddenly, Michael took a firm step toward her. I realize I shouldn't be having this conversation with you. You're married, and Robert is my companion. From the outside, my confession seems mean to someone who is not quite healthy, but I can't help it. I am drawn to you with such force that I am losing my head. Elizabeth was embarrassed by his confession, but answered him honestly. The worst part of it all is that I like you too. I wouldn't call it love, but you touched some strings in my feminine soul. Michael looked hopefully into her eyes. Shall I take your answer to mean that I have a chance to win your favor? Let's switch to you after all. I think we can leave all this superfluous ceremony behind already. Elizabeth answered slowly, as if considering something. We'll certainly transition to you easily. That's not the point, Elizabeth replied. You have to understand, Michael, Robert is my life, my only man, the father of my children, my soul and my heart. Right now, I may have the beginnings of a simple desire. I'm alive. But I'm not going to cheat on my husband. He and I are what they call, for better or for worse, let our heads sit on the same pillow, like Robert's. He's already gone gray since his surgery. I'm not arguing with that either. I'm just covering up the gray that's coming in so he won't see it. Think about it. Do you want a woman like me? Is it worth loving me and wasting precious time of your life? Michael was more serious than ever. All remnants of the champagne he'd drunk at the party were gone. I'll wait, Elizabeth. As long as it takes for you to realize how you really feel about me. I won't even remind you of that. But you should know that at any hour of the day or night, the doors of my bachelor pad are open to you. Let you not confuse that I am 7 years younger, that I have never been married, that having no experience in family life, I will learn everything quickly, if next to me will be a woman like you. Then they were silent most of the time at home. Everyone was thinking about his own things. They didn't want to talk. Elizabeth didn't know what to do. Should she tell her husband that Michael had confessed his love to her, that he had promised to wait for her if she decided to leave Robert? She decided against it. She never said a word about that conversation. Michael decided otherwise. He decided to have a frank talk with Robert because he doesn't want to do anything behind his back. He considers it dishonest. He will ask his comrade to let his wife be happy and let her go to another man. That is, to him. Stalling for an explanation, he would not. There was too much at stake for himself. He was not really an ardent bachelor, had on the male account of a womanizer dozens of short-lived novels. But his heart was silent. As a professional cameraman, he could spot beauty, distinguish artificial grimaces. He fell in love with Jennifer like an inexperienced boy. The imperfect figure of the not young girl excited him so much that after meeting Jennifer for a long time, he could not calm the rapid pulse. She wasn't a fan of makeup. Her childishly naive gray eyes were without a single dab of mascara. He thought that was even better. He didn't see any flaws or imperfections in her, didn't notice what she was wearing today. All he cared about was her mood and her condition. Did she feel good? Was she not too tired? When they found themselves alone without her husband at the corporate ball, he felt like he was on a date with a woman for the first time in his life. Everything he'd had before her had been erased from his soul, from his memory. He was starting his life with a clean slate in matters of communication with the opposite sex. Only this way, not the other way around. The moment he pulled off his jacket and threw it over Jennifer's frozen back, he decided for himself that it was now or never, but he had to talk to her. He had an acquaintance who worked at the clinic where Robert had been operated on, so he knew the whole situation. His chosen one, his Jennifer, should be living life to the fullest. She's only a little over 40. It's a crime against her life. That's what fate had decreed. The conversation between Michael and Robert took place 3 days later. In the living room, two destinies, two contenders for happiness, in love and in love for many years, came together, a cripple and a healthy, strong man, a man who had lost all hope and a man who was very much hoping for happiness. They did not shirk. They were honest with each other to the end. "I love her more than life," Michael asked. "Let her go, she can still be happy." "I offered her a divorce when I found out about my diagnosis and future prospects," Robert explained. "She wouldn't leave. Let her decide for herself." They parted not as enemies, not as friends. Before they did, they called Elizabeth and told her that they had had such a difficult but honest conversation. She suddenly took offense. "I'm not a thing. Why are you dividing me behind my back and without telling me?" Elizabeth said. Michael replied that it was Robert's will. He explained that he didn't want to cause her any unnecessary pain. It was so confusing, so frightening. The circumstances proposed for the three of them were not impossible. They could even be called quite civilized. But that didn't make it any easier for their trio. No one yet understood what the decision of a woman who was loved by two worthy men would be. For several days, everything in Robert's house was as if no sharp, momentous proposals had come from Michael. The man himself had gone quiet somewhere, never showing his face. Elizabeth fiddled with the daily chores and paid even more attention to caring for her husband, but was mostly suspiciously silent. Joan's downfall. Another stormy affair, and yet another piece of news rocked them. He was offered to star in a commercial, also to be the face of the company, but a youthful one. He was bursting with pride. "I am also handsome and will soon appear on the first billboards in the city," he said. His father, having listened to his enthusiastic story about his first successes, cooled his ardor a little. "Son, beauty has two sides. My mother and I still turn a blind eye to the endless round dance of your girls. But at some point you'll have to stop, settle down, choose the one you want to live with for the rest of your life." Joan retorted, "Dad, you're talking like you're in the last century. Love is one woman for life. Do you believe in these fairy tales? Even though you and Mom have been together for more than 20 years, you have an ironclad certainty that it will always be like that." Robert shivered. He didn't have that certainty right now. He didn't know. What if Elizabeth still wanted to try a different kind of happiness? These thoughts were slowly making him mad. And yet, he loved her so much that he was willing to let her go. A woman shouldn't have to give up on herself. The atmosphere in the apartment was a little annoying to Catherine. She spent the whole day right after school, disappeared at music lessons, and then at home sang romances, which she now passed with the teacher at the top of her voice. Lines from a gorgeous piece were now being sung, touching the notes of romance in her soul. Elizabeth was washing dishes in the kitchen and thought wistfully, "Everything feels like it's pushing me toward Michael. Or maybe I'm looking everywhere for signs, pointers." I sometimes shuddered at the memory of that evening. I couldn't lie to myself. The dilemma: how to move on. After a conversation between the two men who love her, circumstances, as always, pushed her to the denouement. The video with her husband in the lead role took first place in a contest of advertising products. To receive the award had to be not anywhere, but in Chicago. That's where the competition was held, regional companies. With this news, Michael again appeared in their house, enthusiastic, handsome, with hope in his burning eyes. Robert, Elizabeth, this is such a success. Such heights. You and I must go to Chicago for this prestigious award. I will help as much as possible to make the trip comfortable, he said. Robert's mind immediately thought, here it is, the one that will make all the difference. Elizabeth must go to Chicago with Michael without me. I will let her go at any cost. Robert was a little miffed that he did not have to persuade his wife to go to Chicago. He immediately considered it a bad sign for him, a harbinger of the separation that would follow the trip. He was engaged in an inner dialogue with himself. What did you really want? That she would voluntarily enroll as a nun. You haven't touched her in 3 years. Robert moved defiantly into the living room to the large upholstered sofa. Elizabeth was packing her suitcase. No closet antics, no special outfits. Leaning toward restraint. This will be a business trip. I'll just act as my husband's official representative and go straight home, she thought. But then why had she put her prettiest lingerie at the bottom of the suitcase? She'd stuffed the bottle of perfume in her pocket. The one Michael had said at the party that smelled so good. Had she already made up her mind, and was she just fooling men? But after all, in her heart is still no answer to the question that concerns them both: who will she choose? In Chicago, in order not to waste time, Michael and Elizabeth arrived by airplane. The events were designed for 3 days. They would also have the opportunity to walk around the city. At the hotel, their rooms were on opposite sides of the hallway, but on the same floor. Elizabeth quickly changed into comfortable jeans, sneakers, and a long sleeve. Screw all the dresses and high-heeled shoes. I only brought them for tomorrow's ceremony. Charming Michael is not part of my plan, she thought. They had dinner right in the hotel restaurant. There was neither the energy nor the desire to look for something else. Before, Michael and Elizabeth had not felt constrained in each other's company, but now it was as if they had a bond of silence. They did not speak, but stuttered on every word. Do you like it? It's amazingly picturesque, Michael kept saying. His favorite place of power turned out to be a fenced area on the roof of a high-rise building with benches, tables, and even umbrellas from the sun, which were now rolled up. Tidy, cozy, unusual. On the walls, colorful drawings, graffiti. Now they were here alone amidst the city lights fading into twilight, and beneath them was all of Chicago in the palm of their hands. A mesmerizing sight. After drinking wine from a plastic cup, Elizabeth felt a sense of relaxation begin to blossom inside her for the first time. There was a beauty in the change of scenery, after all. Conversation was effortless now. Michael talked about his childhood, about his parents, who lived in a small town near Chicago. They loved their greenhouses, where they grew several unusual varieties of tomatoes. When fresh salad greens appeared on the table, there you could find fruits ranging in color from orange and yellow to black. Michael pulled Elizabeth to him, kissed her. She did not push him away as before, but responded to his kiss. They like you, Michael said. Who? Jennifer didn't understand. My parents, he explained. They're very simple, but they're also very warm-hearted people. They'll be easy for you to be with. She didn't say anything against it. She couldn't forget his kiss. And he realized it in his gut. They went to his room in the hotel. After that sleepless night of awarding a statuette for the best work of her husband, as a model of commercials Elizabeth remembered as in a fog. Then she and Michael had nothing to stop them from being together for 2 more days. The man thought triumphantly, Elizabeth is mine now. She will now leave Robert for good. There can be no doubt about that. He did not ask her anything about it. He was absolutely sure. They flew home in silence. It seemed to him that there was a complete understanding between them. From the airport they went to his house. Hastily, in 4 hands, prepared dinner. Again they locked in a long embrace. They fell asleep in the morning. When Michael awoke, Elizabeth was gone. On the nightstand next to his bed was a note. Michael, I'm sorry I'm a jerk because I only used you. I had to figure out, can I do it without Robert? The answer is no. You're a very good man. You're very gentle. But my heart tells me I don't love you and I never will. There's still only room for my husband. Thank you for everything. He didn't understand anything. He reread the text of the note, looked around once more. All of Elizabeth's things had disappeared from the bedroom. Would she go back to Robert again? Michael didn't kid himself. A woman like Elizabeth would indeed return to her husband, love him further, understanding everything, and endure the hardships associated with it. And the fact that she gave it temporary weakness, it is understandable. Elizabeth honestly told Michael that she was alive. He immediately added another epithet of his own real. Michael immediately forgave her and, moreover, did not have any claims to her, did not think that she humiliated his male ego. Robert woke up reluctantly, out of inertia. He did not want to stay in this world. After all, Michael and Elizabeth were supposed to return home from New York yesterday. But Elizabeth never showed up. So she hadn't made her choice in his favor. Joan had gone to a sleepover at a friend's house last night, threatening to spend the whole weekend with her. And Catherine was getting some sleep after the recital. Robert sniffed his nose and thought how strange. The apartment smells like my favorite cheesecakes with raisins and vanilla. Is Catherine up at the crack of dawn and working in the kitchen? The man quickly pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt, moved into his wheelchair, and drove to the smell of fried cottage cheese. In the kitchen, with his back to him, his Elizabeth was fiddling in a stretched homemade bright yellow t-shirt and black and white checked capri pants, his favorite. The boiling kettle whistled on the stove, so she didn't hear the sound of the stroller pulling into the kitchen. That's what a loving woman's heart is capable of. Like a barometer, it picks up any changes in the family atmosphere. Elizabeth instantly turned around and saw the happy blue eyes looking at her with mute adoration. She rushed to the man, knelt down, and embraced his motionless legs. "Can you forget and forgive me all that has happened during these 3 days of my absence?" Elizabeth asked. I could not resist. The native instinct of woman was stronger than my moral principles. "But I have learned the most important thing: there can be no other man on this earth, and in the whole universe, but you, and let only death separate us, but very soon." Tears flowed from Robert's eyes. He wasn't going to resent her. He loved her too much and wanted her to be happy. Even if not with him, but what happiness it was. His woman had chosen him again out of a million men, just as she had done then, more than 20 years ago. Could any new misfortunes ruin their love now? Michael asked her quietly. So, together again. And now forever? Elizabeth answered. Yes, only like that, only together, my love. At that moment, the honored Catherine came into the kitchen. Like her father before, she too was attracted by the curious aroma. "Mom, are you making your specialty cheesecakes?" she exclaimed. "I'm the first to taste." She reached for the ruddy curds on her plate, not even bothering to scoop Elizabeth's sour cream into her cup. "By the way, my dear parents, why are you at the movies this morning? It's not like we haven't seen each other in 3 or 4 days." "What a tragedy," said Catherine carelessly. Elizabeth thought to herself that a tragedy could have happened if she had made the wrong decision, and Robert could think of nothing at all. He had dissolved into his wife. How good life is, even in a wheelchair. You just have to realize it in time, appreciate it, feel it. Sometimes it's even possible to persevere through tough trials. He and Elizabeth did. Vanessa was on her way to her mother Jessica's hospital. On the way, she was leafing through a fashion magazine she found on a bench at the bus stop. Rich, beautiful, and successful models with perfect makeup and hairstyles, dressed in clothes of famous brands, looked at the girl from the pages. Their beauty was so bright, so perfect, that Vanessa did not even think of envy. It didn't occur to her that she could look good in expensive clothes after a visit to the salon. There was no room for anything expensive in her and her mother's quiet and modest life. Her mother had worked as a nurse in a polyclinic all her life, with occasional part-time jobs as an orderly and cleaner. Vanessa tried to help her as much as possible. The girl never asked about her father. Only once her mother misspoke, saying that people like him would never get in touch with people like them. What did she mean, and what hidden meaning did she put in that phrase? It remained a mystery to Vanessa. In her earliest childhood, the girl had been terribly curious to know who her daddy was. She didn't dare to ask about him as a child, so she could fantasize about him as much as she wanted. The fact that he was not written in her birth documents added even more mystery to him. The girl grew up, and with her grew the role of her father in her fantasies. In time, she began to imagine that he spent his life performing important and dangerous tasks. He was strictly forbidden to disclose the family. That's why she and her mom lived in this tiny, forgotten town. Living in it, it was absolutely impossible to believe that some 200 kilometers away was the brilliant city of New York, in which life was boiling and beating key. And their life didn't even flow, it barely ebbed and flowed, finding its way among the eternal busyness of the mother and the quiet, imperceptible hobbies of the daughter. Vanessa herself didn't remember at what point she started writing down her thoughts, dreams about her father, and life stories. By the time she reached the age of consciousness, she had accumulated so many such records that it would be enough for a small book. Going through the records, the girl acquired her first dream to publish a book and become a writer in that order. After all, she needed the approval of her readers to continue. For now, only 2 obstacles separated her from the moment when the manuscript would see the light of day: money and fear. Fear that her work would not be appreciated. Are you kidding me? Vanessa couldn't say she was unhappy. Mom Jessica, despite the busyness and complete lack of money, always tried to pay attention to her daughter, to please, hug, and cheer up. The girl grew up in love and therefore not so acutely felt the lack of some things: fashionable clothes, expensive toys, and sweets. Every weekend, Mom took the girl by the hand and they went to the park or the forest to walk, get acquainted with nature, feed ducks or fish. Once in class, answering the teacher's question, how she knows so much about animals, plants, nature, the girl told about their little tradition with her mother. So she, without wanting to, and without knowing it, made her first enemy a classmate, Kiara. Kiara grew up in a rich family, but she saw no love, no attention, no care. Expensive toys could not replace parents. Fancy clothes, lively communication, and gadgets, family warmth. The fact that Vanessa possessed all of these things, and therefore bypassed her, ignited an envy in Kiara that quickly turned to hatred. Thoughts jumped around in the girl's head like hairs from one memory to another. Apparently she was ready to think about anything but the fact that the bus would stop at the end of the ride. Vanessa would get off at the final stop and go to the hospital. There for the second week, her mom was in the hospital with no hope of recovery. The doctor repeatedly offered to discharge her home, to live with her family and friends. Vanessa refused. For Jessica's mom, she was the only family and friends she had. But there was no strength to support her mom at all. They were barely enough to drive to her mom's house every day, bring home cooked meals, and stay cheerful. Returning home, she would close the door and slowly slump down on it, biting her lip in pain. The nearest, dearest, and only dear person in her life was leaving. There was nothing she could do about it. One of the orderlies hinted for the girl to start preparing. For what? Vanessa clapped her eyes in bewilderment, not really understanding what she was talking about. And she did. For what? Not for the discharge, for the funeral. What funeral? What are you talking about? Mom will recover and will live like we used to. We'd like that to happen, but this disease doesn't give us a chance. You're wrong. You're wrong. Mom's strong, she'll be fine. Besides, the doctor offered to discharge her. Yes, to live to avoid spending state funds. The woman grinned loudly. Here, Derivianko, take this and you'll need it. And she handed Vanessa neatly folded bills. No need, we don't need anything. The catchphrase of all those who really need everything. Maybe not you, but you should see your mother off. I'll tell you everything in order tomorrow, or you'll forget something. I told you, you don't have to teach me anything or explain anything. Mom and I are fine. Only 5 days later, Vanessa sobbed in the arms of the same nurse, unable to accept the fact that she was all alone in the world. The old woman stroked her head and quietly repeated that everything would be all right, that Mom was now in a better world, she was not hurt or scared there. And Vanessa thought how scary it is when there are no close and dear people. Not at all. This nurse will wait for the girl to calm down and go about her business. And in a couple of days, she'll forget about Vanessa and her grief. And Vanessa will stay and continue to live in a world where no one is interested in how she is and how she feels. Suddenly, the nurse said a phrase that, in fact, turned the girl's consciousness upside down and subsequently completely changed her life. And cry now, you and your mother to bury, and father to support. Men bear grief worse, said the nurse. I've never seen yours. When she realized that she had said something wrong, the woman continued. Do you have one, your father? No, and never had one, Vanessa answered. How come? I don't know. I've never seen him. My mom never told me. But any other relatives? No one. Mom was the only one. It's impossible for a man to be alone. If your parents broke up when you were young, foolishly, and then your pride didn't allow you to reconcile, and your father lives somewhere, does not know that he has a beautiful daughter, then Vanessa did not pay attention to the words of a kind woman, who, by the way, really helped the girl with the organization of the funeral. Advised and prompted how and what should be done. Without her, Vanessa would not have done even half of what she had to do. In the evening after the funeral, Vanessa remembered the nurse's words. Except to say search, and it's easy. And where to begin the search, thought the girl, absolutely no idea. And she decided to start with taking apart her mother's archive, a massive old dresser filled with various useful and useless but memorable things. Several drawers were occupied by Vanessa's mother's document school, leaving certificates, diplomas, letters, and photos. As a child, the girl often went through them in search of something interesting. Then she didn't pay much attention to old photographs and letters, half of which she couldn't even read because of illegible handwriting. Today she wanted to study everything thoroughly. Among the papers she found the deeds to the apartment. It turned out that the apartment had belonged to her for many years. A deed of gift had been made in her name, but the name of the donor was unfamiliar to Vanessa, and the date was approximately the same as the date of birth of the girl. After spending the night without sleep, trying to make sense of everything that was stored in her mother's dresser, by morning Vanessa was forced to admit that she had learned nothing new. The letters stored were from her parents' girlfriends. Vanessa knew Mom's parents had left this world long before she came along. Mom had been in medical school then. Barely self-sufficient, she was left alone. Then she'd found support in friends and a certain David. Vanessa was interested in the mention of the young man, but he was only mentioned a couple of times. Not enough for the man who later became the father of her child. And the references were odd. David brought her, drove her, helped her. It was like she wasn't talking about her lover, but a longshoreman. Unpacking the largest box of letters, the girl at the bottom found a postcard from a Black Sea resort. Strange, Vanessa said to herself. Mom never said she had been to the sea. The postcard was addressed to her parents. It said that the girl was doing well and the vacation was going well. Well, it turns out Mom had a busy life, and I saw her always busy, tired, running from one job to another, thought Vanessa. In another box, As if to confirm her thoughts, Vanessa found a photo of her mother from the seashore. She was looking at her as a young girl, no more than 20 years old. She was smiling radiantly, hugging the young man around the waist. The problem was that the young man himself was mercilessly torn from the photo. Neither his face nor even his height could be determined. So interesting, Vanessa said. So Mom went on vacation with a certain young man. Probably, most likely, my father. Apparently, their relationship didn't work out with my mom. She threw his picture away and never told me anything. After rummaging through the rest of the papers, hoping to find the second part of the photo, Vanessa had to give up. Dawn was dawning outside the window. She began to drift off to sleep. In her dream, she saw her mother young and cheerful again. She was running along the edge of the sea and laughing. A young man was following her with big steps. He opened his arms, trying to catch the girl in his arms, but each time she managed to slip out of his reach. Vanessa tried to see the young man's face, but it kept dissolving in the glare of the sun. Vanessa awoke just before noon. The June sun was shining brightly outside the window. She had to decide how to live in general and what to do today in particular. She decided to start by tidying up the apartment to take her mind off things. But even while she was busy with her physical work, she couldn't stop thinking about how to move on. Vanessa had a brilliant 9th grade school certificate and a red diploma from the teacher's college she had entered after a classmate, Chiara, had made her stay at school unbearable. Vanessa could not understand when she crossed the road daughter of rich parents and what earned her hatred. Just one day the girl hated her a quiet, unremarkable, excellent student who never said a word against anyone. Chiara turned out to be very persistent and inventive in terms of mischief. In just 3 years, she had developed such an active activity to turn Vanessa's life into a nightmare that the famous quiet girl had no choice but to look for a suitable school and transfer. It was pointless to change schools. Chiara had acquaintances everywhere. So Vanessa, at the age of 18, was almost a specialist. However, she did not have time to rejoice in her diploma. The departure of her mother made all the joys dim and insignificant. For a whole week, Vanessa tried to find a job by specialty in schools and kindergartens. It turned out that no one needed young specialists with a great desire to work, but a complete lack of experience. The money, which after the funeral was left very little, quickly ran out, and Vanessa had to sharply lower the bar of requirements for work. Now she was happy to take any position as long as she could get money for food. She posted her resume everywhere she could, but no one was willing to hire her. Finally, late one night, the phone rang. "Vanessa, good afternoon. You placed an ad for a job. Is it still up to date?" asked on the other end of the line. "Yes, of course," replied the girl, practically jumping with joy with the receiver in her hands. "Are you not embarrassed by the offer to work as a maid?" "No, I'm ready for any kind of work now." "Great. Then they'll be expecting you tomorrow. I'll text you the address. Try to be there no later than 10. The personnel manager is a finicky man. He doesn't like to be late," the phone said. "By the way, are you ready to move to the employer's house?" "Yes, I guess I'm ready." "Where does he live?" "Staten Island." "In principle, you can come from home, but we have situations when you need to stay longer or get up early." "Where is Staten Island?" "I don't know," Vanessa admitted, who had never left her hometown. "Staten Island is a borough of New York City. That's the city you listed on your resume." Vanessa remembered that she had actually written that in a few sentences, not really hoping for a response. "I probably won't make it by 10 tomorrow. I live in another city." "Which one?" asked on the other end of the line. Having heard the answer, the interlocutor didn't seem to be surprised. "In the morning, you will take the train from your city. It leaves at 6, and you will be met at the station. If you are ready to work, pack everything you need at once." What exactly would I need to be a maid? Vanessa asked. Ahead, at least the caller grinned and hung up. Vanessa sat down on the floor, puzzled. The offer was as unexpected and mysterious as possible. They were ready to send an automobile to the train for the maid. She was so surprised by this offer that she forgot to ask about salary and working conditions. And what was the point of these questions? After all, the girl had never worked. She did not even have a labor book. Besides, the money was enough only for a ticket. Well, it's not much of a choice to starve here for another week, or to take a risk and go to work in the city of dreams. I think the decision is obvious. I'm going, the girl said to herself and went to pack her things. Vanessa, who had never left the city, was faced with a very difficult choice. But what to take with her on the trip? What would come in handy for work? How would she leave the apartment? With the apartment account, the solution was obvious: give the keys to her neighbor to keep an eye on her. Late one night, Vanessa knocked on the neighbor's door. "Jessica, could you help me out?" she asked. "Yes, Vanessa, what's wrong? What are you doing up so late?" "I already went to bed," the neighbor replied. Vanessa knew perfectly well that the neighbor was lying. No one knew when she slept or if she slept at all. She was awake at all hours of the day and always saw and heard everything. She was aware of every incident, every gossip, every scandal. "Jessica, I have to leave early tomorrow morning. I'll leave the spare keys. You keep an eye on the apartment," Vanessa said. "Where do you think you're going?" The girl's first impulse was to keep silent. After all, tomorrow not only the whole entrance, but the whole city will know about her plans. If anyone in the city is even interested in her modest person. However, having judiciously reasoned that to go to an unknown place, without warning anyone, is definitely not worth it, she replied. "I'm going to New York to get a job. We couldn't find anything here. We need something to live on." "Are you going to look for your father?" the woman asked in a bizarre way. "Who?" "You know, my father. I thought he was from New York." "How do you even know about my father?" "My mom never told me anything about him." There was nothing to tell. They didn't even get to know each other before she got pregnant and he ran away from her. "How do you know that?" "We moved into this apartment when I was born." The woman hesitated. It was obvious that she was trying to find the words to answer. "Well, people said that you were born to some important man. That's the apartment your mother was given. But your parents didn't have anything serious." "I don't know anything else. Don't ask. You know me. I've got no bones in my mouth." "What I would have known, I would have told you," the old woman said, as Vanessa prepared to ask more. "I'm going to apply for a job as a maid in the house of some wealthy man. I'll write to you as soon as I'm settled." "Of course you will. What if they take away your passport and take you where?" "To the border." Vanessa was surprised. "You may be quiet, but you're a good-looking girl." "Jessica, don't worry. They won't like someone like me," she shook her head. "Well, you shouldn't be like that. Your mother, she was the same." All her life, Vanessa considered herself unworthy of relationships. Everyone was ashamed that she was raised by her mother without a husband. And the guys who were chasing her long ago, maybe they could have lifted her out of poverty. She'd be alive now. I feel sorry for Vanessa. The old woman really well treated the young, quiet neighbor, who alone tried to raise her daughter, Kiara. It was a shame that she, having lived such a hard life, had left this world so young. Vanessa's mom was barely over 40. However, she looked in recent years no less than 60. Classmates took her for Vanessa's grandmother, and only she saw her as a beauty. And here, perhaps also a neighbor. Having collected everything necessary, Vanessa packed a change of clothes, documents, and the rest of the money. The girl closed the apartment and went to the train station. There were only a couple hours left before the train. Staying alone in the apartment was becoming more and more difficult. A city station at any time of the day is quite a sight. Not for nothing they say that train stations have seen more sincere love than marriage palaces. Vanessa witnessed the real emotions of parting, meeting, friendship, and love. It's as if at the moment of the last meeting before the road or the first after the separation, people's soul opens a little wider, and only the most sincere emotions are the first to burst out of it. Later, when the moment passes, people become more reserved and reserved. When the train came to the platform, the girl turned around for the last time and looked at the city she had grown up in and was now leaving, without much regret. I must say, what, in fact, can these streets and houses mean if there is no one left in the city who is dear to your heart? It so happened that she had no school friends and girlfriends. Or rather, once they had been, but the incomprehensible war, which was declared to her by a classmate, made everyone turn away from her. For 3 years of this war, not only Vanessa and all the other guys could not understand why Kiara was so beaten up on her. The fact that a rich, fashionable girl could simply envy the quiet Vanessa didn't even cross anyone's mind. For some reason, it was at the moment of leaving town that Vanessa remembered her high school years. Probably so that she finally confirmed the correctness of the decision to leave the city and not return. Sitting in the station building, she decided that she would stay in New York, and if the maid job didn't work out, she would find another one. The main thing to get a foothold in the big city, and return to her native tiny town without the prospect of forever will have time. Having made up her mind, she entered the carriage, changed her clothes, and fell into a sound and healthy sleep for the first time in months. Shortly before arriving at the New York train station, her phone rang. "Vanessa, are you there?" "Yes, in half an hour." "Yes." "Great. There's a car waiting for you." The caller gave the license plate number and a parking spot. Sitting in the cabin, she looked around the city with amazement. It seemed that she was in a fairy tale. Beautiful old buildings, bridges, parks, as if descended from the illustrations of fashion magazines. And here, amidst all this splendor, she was to live. Vanessa didn't think at all about the work she had to do. She was not afraid of hard or dirty work. She realized that she could hardly expect anything more now. But one thing she knew for sure was that she was not leaving this city. From the busy streets, the driver turned into a picturesque area. Multi-story buildings were replaced by beautiful mansions. Vanessa didn't even try to imagine who could live in them and what kind of income they had. She heard that the driver called someone and asked which exit to take the girl to. After getting an answer, he drove into the gate of one of the mansions and parked the car. Vanessa sat in a small, cozy lobby, waiting for the personnel manager. He turned out to be a short man, slightly over 40, athletic and focused. "Vanessa, I'm the one who called you. Come on, I'll familiarize you with your duties, show you how everything works here." "Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to work and bringing me here. I'm so grateful." "You'll thank me when you've worked here. You'll thank me when you've worked here. You may think it's a tough job. A lot of people can't handle it. But in fact, if you try hard enough, you can do it all." "Do you have any cleaning skills?" "I hope so. I used to help my mom at work a lot." "What was Mom like?" "She was a nurse and a hospital nurse. I worked with her to make it easier for her." "Mom doesn't work now. Mom died a little over 2 weeks ago." Vanessa didn't notice the man clenching his jaw, as if in pain, but continued talking. "I'm sorry for your loss. We have a somewhat specific cleaning service. As you can see, the interior is very expensive. So for now, your duties will include cleaning the back rooms, the staff rooms, assisting the kitchen staff, let's just say interning on the sidelines. There will be 4 other girls interning with you. Only 2 will stay on. We're not fully staffed yet, so you could be useful in other jobs." "Is there anyone living in the house?" Not yet. The owner lived abroad for a long time. The house was completed only last year and just the other day finished repair, decoration and design. So we are still recruiting staff. If you work and show diligence, you will have quite decent positions. Wages. Are you happy with it, by the way? I don't know, you haven't told me. I don't know. The man stopped so abruptly that Vanessa ran into him. So you left your hometown and came to an unfamiliar metropolis without even finding out the terms of cooperation? What do I have to lose? I can't get a better job. I can always come back and get a job as a cleaner or a saleswoman. What have I got to lose? Yes, only at 18 you can think so recklessly. It seemed that the last phrase was addressed to myself. How much will I get? Based on the fact that you are a non-professional, inexperienced employee, plus you will live here and be provided with uniforms and food, about $50,000 a month. For the first month you will work without days off, the man warned when he saw the girl's face stretch after the sum was announced. Are you serious? For a maid's job plus food, lodging and clothing is a dream. I don't quite understand you. Are you against it? I'm all for it. Yes, we're ready to work weekends, but also without lunch and sleep. Yes, just leave me alone. So you're happy with the terms? Yes. Great. Here's your room being set up. I'll see you downstairs in an hour. There'll be a general briefing and staff introductions. I'll be alone in the room? Of course. This isn't a dormitory. The landlord has a very human attitude towards people, including the servants. Thank you very much. Vanessa pressed herself against the man in a grateful impulse and felt for a moment that he wanted to respond to the embrace, but held back. Maybe in a hug, too. I think it's unnecessary, the man began, but Vanessa didn't listen. Thank you again. I'll do my best. I hope to see you in an hour. The uniforms are in the closet. For the first few minutes, Vanessa couldn't believe her happiness. More demanding girls might have thought, how can anyone be excited about the prospect of being a maid? But to her, it was fabulous luck, and she didn't want to miss the opportunity. Half an hour later, she was ready and standing in the hallway, trying to remember how to get to the lobby where all the staff was supposed to gather. The corridor was empty. It was quiet outside the room doors. The girl regretted not looking around as she walked and completely forgot to ask for directions to the lobby. Finally, she managed to get to the stairs, going down into a spacious room. The employees were already starting to gather there. Several girls, apparently also maids, were already drinking, getting acquainted and chatting. Besides them were the cook, several of his assistants, the gardener, the guards, the head maid, and the driver who had brought Vanessa. The girl was just about to approach the others to get acquainted. But at that moment, the man who was introducing her to the house walked in. Suddenly, she realized that she hadn't even asked his name. That's a really strange impression she made on him, without asking his name, or working conditions, or the size of his salary. But she packed up and drove from her hometown to huge New York. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Alan, the house manager. I'm going to introduce you to the house rules. Most of the information you've already received. In addition, each of you has a small handout in your room regarding your responsibilities. I suggest you study them, especially for those who have no experience. The house is new, and the owners will move in only in a month. During this time, you and I need to get used to it and learn to work together as a team. You'll find the daily schedule in the room. We'll start living by it tomorrow. Today, familiarization with the house, responsibilities. I warn at once, personal relations, violation of discipline, bad habits, the reason for dismissal without clarification. For all this, you will have a weekend in the house. You are obliged to behave with dignity. The master is a man strict, conservative. Living in the house, he will be with his spouse and son. Perhaps his son's sweetheart will live in the house. "How old are they all?" one of the maid girls asked. "The master's name is David. He and his wife Addison are 45. His son Matthew is 23. His girlfriend Ciara is just over 18. If I'm not mistaken." Our host is the owner of a large gemstone mining and processing corporation. His wife is the owner of a jewelry manufacturing firm. His son has recently finished his studies in England and will help his father in his business. But for any questions, you should contact me. Try to keep contact with family members to a minimum. They are reserved people, and this many strangers is also very stressful for them. They will bring in a staff member to clean their private rooms and serve at the table. "It's complicated," said one of the girls. "If you are not satisfied with these complications, you can always tell me and we will find a replacement for you," the man said calmly. No, I'm fine with it." Vanessa listened and could not believe her own ears. How far this world was from the one she lived in. Vanessa spent half the day learning the rules and duties, the routines. She walked around the part of the house where she was to work. Vanessa got to know all the staff. She was in such a confused state that she could not fully comprehend the amount of change that had taken place in her life. Perhaps it is only when you are young that you can be so carefree to enjoy everything and change your life so easily. From the next day, her labor career began. Accustomed to labor, the girl did not experience special difficulties, quickly performing the entire amount of work. It was for this that the other maids began to dislike her. The work, designed for the whole day, she performed in a few hours, not distracted by conversations. As a result, Alan began to grumble at the others, who were much less eager to work than Vanessa. By the end of the month, the entire staff had settled in, learned their duties, and established interpersonal relationships. Fortunately, fears of romance at work were completely unfounded. Almost all of the adult staff were married, and the maid girls were not interested in the single Alan, the driver, an unloved and withdrawn guy in his 30s. He was also to fulfill the duties of a security guard should the need arise. From one day to the next, the arrival of the family was awaited. Their rooms were ready the day before their arrival. Their assistant Chloe arrived to check on the final preparations. She appeared to be a stern and collected woman whose age was impossible to determine. She was equally likely to be in her 30s or 50s. One day, Vanessa decided to ask Alan a question that had been bothering her for a long time. "Alan, please tell me, why do you never call anyone by their middle name, everyone, including yourself? Do you introduce only by first name?" "It's a habit we picked up while we were living in England. There are no middle names there. Everyone calls each other by first or last name. David and Addison should be called that too, but I told you not to go near them yet." "I remember." The arrival of the hosts was not a special event for the staff. The cook cooked lunch, got orders for dinner. Chloe herself gave all the orders, working surprisingly well with Alan. The young maid girl suggested that they might well be having an affair. For dinner, they waited for the arrival of Ciara, the future daughter-in-law of the owners. The girl had been born and raised in Russia, but had spent the last few years in England, where she had met Matthew. The girl's father had a brilliant career, so she was a favorable party. She was to be surprised and charmed. What was Vanessa's surprise when she recognized her former classmate in the girl who arrived, the same one who had made her school years a living hell. Vanessa realized that as soon as Ciara saw her and recognized her, her days in this house would be numbered. So she had to do everything to make sure that the girl, the daughter-in-law of the master's son, did not notice her. Fortunately, the young people just a couple of weeks later went on vacation to one of the resorts. Sitting in the city in the summer was really unbearable. One day, Vanessa came running into one of the rooms, checking the dust on the top shelf of a massive closet. Getting to it with her short stature was impossible. She had to use a small ladder. Engrossed in her work, she didn't immediately notice she wasn't alone in the room. That's why when Matthew, who was watching her, coughed softly. She flinched, lost her balance, and fell down the stairs. Although the stairs were not high, the bruise from the fall could have been quite painful and serious if Matthew hadn't caught her on the fly. Tall and athletic, he picked up the petite girl as if she were nothing. For a few moments he held her in his arms, keeping his admiring gaze on her. It was the first time Vanessa had ever caught such a look of admiration. Since high school, she had been accustomed to thinking of herself as inconspicuous, unassuming, unworthy of attention. In college, the situation was no different. The few boys paid no attention to her, which combined with her unremarkable appearance, made her insecure. But now, when she was held in the arms of a stunningly handsome, tall, strong and confident young man, literally eating her up with his eyes, Vanessa felt confident, strong and charming, as if she were wearing a stunning outfit rather than a modest uniform. "I apologize if I startled you," Matthew said. His voice was like black velvet, enveloping me with softness. Vanessa said, "I'm very grateful to you. Could you put me down on the floor? Someone might come in. It would be a bad situation. I can explain everything to them." Matthew didn't seem to think of obeying her request, as if he realized that what she was saying was the exact opposite of what she wanted. "I have to insist," she said. Putting Vanessa on the floor, he held her in his arms for a few moments, pressing her gently against him and not letting her break free. Unable to tear her gaze away from him, Vanessa admired the perfect appearance of her master's son. Those rare moments when she did get to see him, she thought only of avoiding Chiara's eyes. Looking at her fiancé was something Vanessa dared not think about. But now she stood in the embrace of his strong arms and could think of nothing but how beautiful these moments were. As if with great regret, the young man unclasped his hands, releasing the girl. It should be noted, he did it very timely. Vanessa had no sooner taken a couple of steps toward the door than Lucinda entered the living room through the other entrance. "Honey, there you are. I've been looking all over for you," she said. Hearing the familiar voice behind her, Vanessa hurried to retrace her steps and hide in the nearest room. Closing the door and leaning against it, she tried to calm her frantic heartbeat for a few minutes. She herself couldn't answer exactly what caused it, the unexpected meeting with Chiara or the embrace of her fiancé. "I should be more careful," Vanessa thought. "Today she'll notice me, tomorrow she'll remember me. And the day after tomorrow I'll go back to my small town." Since that day, the girl tried her best not to be seen by any of the owners of the house, but it was much more difficult to command her heart. And is it possible at the age of 18? Vanessa fell in love with the son of the owner and could not command her heart not to long for the handsome young man, despite the fact that she had no chance to reciprocate. The next week passed relatively quietly. Matthew and Chiara went to Peterhof and stayed there for a week at the boyfriend's friend's house. Vanessa got a break and could move around the house more or less calmly and fulfill her duties with full dedication. The girl also saw the owners rarely and hardly ever encountered them in person. Alan, noting the responsibility of the staff, periodically made small changes in the staff or reassignment of duties. For example, Vanessa was assigned to clean the guest rooms and all those rooms where the owners were present. And although in this case the probability of crossing with them increased, the girl did not dare to disobey the manager. To avoid being accused of something terrible, Vanessa decided to tell Alan about what Chiara had done to her. "What was the reason?" the man asked after listening to her story. "I don't know. As far as I could tell, the guys didn't know either. It was just something she didn't like. And then she found all sorts of reasons to hate me more and more." "Well, she's gone now, so you can work in peace." "Well, she's gone. Besides, they're getting married in the fall, and then they're going on a honeymoon, after which she'll start school. She won't have time for you. She probably doesn't remember you. How long has it been since you've seen her?" "A little over 3 years." At the mention of the upcoming wedding of her lover and former classmate, Vanessa's legs nearly gave out. She didn't think the happy event would happen so soon. "Don't worry. It's good that you warned me. Don't worry. How come you were in the same class as her?" Her dad was from the local government back then and wanted to show how close he was to the people, which didn't stop his daughter from showing us what dirt we are, basically. "Yeah, tough luck for you. But why have I learned to ignore people like Ciara? Like your mom?" The man's voice broke out involuntarily, but he didn't even seem to notice. "How do you know what my mom was like?" Vanessa was surprised. "You told me." It was obvious that Alan was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Maybe he said at last. The next day, Vanessa met the owner of the house for the first time. She was cleaning the table of photos, humming her mother's favorite song. At that moment, David entered the room. "Jessica," he said involuntarily when he saw the girl. "No, I'm Vanessa. I'm sorry, I didn't know you'd be home at this time. Alan told us to do the cleaning in your absence." "That's okay. Go ahead and work. I won't interrupt you. You just remind me of someone I know." "My mom's name was Jessica," David said unexpectedly. Vanessa continued working. At Alan's insistence, the staff tried not to engage in conversation with the owner. She didn't see the man's face change, as if he had seen a ghost in front of him. The next day, Alan told her that Chloe and the landlady were away on business, and in their absence she would be responsible for cleaning the owner's rooms. "Why me? I thought I was only allowed to clean the hallways and the living room." "It's David's personal order," Alan replied. It was obvious that he was not happy with this decision. Vanessa was not going to argue with her boss, so she went to clean David's room, assuming that he had already left for work. The huge apartment, furnished in classical style, decorated in gray pastel colors, reminded her of a trip to a museum. She spent a few minutes looking at the rich furnishings, which were different from what was in the rest of the house. That was why she did not immediately notice that her host had not left, but was sitting in a deep armchair by the window, apparently immersed in his thoughts. The girl's first impulse was to go out and return later. But at that moment the man raised his hand, in which he held an old photo from his seat. It was perfectly visible who was depicted on it. The black and white photo showed a happy couple standing, embraced on the seashore. The young man was David, only much younger by about 20 years. And the girl Vanessa recognized her mother. It was the very photo she had found after her mom's funeral. Only in her mom's photo, the man was ripped off. Unable to restrain the first impulse, the girl said, "Where did you get a photo of my mom?" David flinched. He seemed to be so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't notice her entering. Quickly putting the photo away, he stood up and got ready to leave the room. "You didn't answer," Vanessa stopped him. "You made a mistake. That's me and my wife when we were young. My mom has the exact same photo, only you're torn off. And your wife is the same height as you. That's my petite mom in the photo. How do you know her?" Vanessa looked into the man's eyes. Many times she had read in books that in the eyes you can find the answer to all questions, and she had never understood how that was possible. Now, looking at the pain reflected in them, the girl realized what the man could not say out loud. "You're my father," she said. David took a deep breath and turned away from the window. Apparently it was easier for him to talk that way. "Yes, but I didn't know Jessica had a baby for a long time. When we broke up, I had Alan keep an eye on her, watch her from afar, help her if she needed it. A year later, however, he told me he'd met Jessica. She absolutely refused any help or any mention of me at all. It turns out he didn't stop looking after you. When you were orphaned, he was the one who made sure you were placed in our home. And you didn't know about this?" "No, not until yesterday. He wanted to keep you close so you wouldn't get into trouble. He hoped I wouldn't recognize you. Basically, he had the right idea. We weren't planning on living in this house for long. The chances of us crossing paths were minimal. But why did you and Mom break up? Do you have any idea? I had a family, a kid, Jessica. And Jessica was just a temporary fling. A distraction from the family routine, the girl finished harshly. No, you're wrong, David objected. She was never just an infatuation for me. Not her. She and I met here in Chicago. She was visiting the museum, and I had business nearby. We bumped into each other, got to talking. Then walked around the city until midnight. I just lost my head so much that I sent my family overseas and flew on vacation with Jessica. She was so sweet, so pure, so light, so trusting. I was serious about divorcing Addison and marrying your mom. What stopped you from doing that? My father. When he found out what I was doing, he was quick to bring me back down to earth. Our business was completely dependent on Addison's father. If I'd left her, my father-in-law would have left us with nothing. At best. At worst, we'd be found somewhere out of town. And it wasn't just my life I was risking. Jessica wouldn't have survived either. I couldn't lie any further, so I told the truth. She was broken and crushed. In the end, she asked me to leave her and never come into her life again. I couldn't just let her disappear. I offered to move to Chicago so I could see her once in a while. And what did she do? Did you know your mother well? She refused, Vanessa replied. Of course she did. I haven't seen her since, but my father asked Alan to keep an eye on her. Well, you know the rest. I saw the deed to the apartment, so Alan gave it to me. I didn't realize who he was at the time. I see now. Maybe he didn't tell me about it. I didn't know about you until yesterday. I mean, the best person to ask is Alan, I guess. I was having a hard time with our breakup. I wanted to go to her and apologize, but suddenly I got the news that Matthew was very ill. I got on the same flight to see him. My father did everything he could to save Matthew, and I came back as late as possible. When I got back, Alan said Jessica was missing, and he couldn't find any trace of her. That's probably when you showed up, and that's how he kept you from me. Maybe he did the right thing. Knowing that my beloved had a child with me, I could hardly resist leaving everything for you. But you had a child in your family too. Yes, I did, David said absently, and turned back to the window. Vanessa decided that the conversation was over and left the room quietly. As she was about to close the door, she realized and asked, "Can I continue working here?" "I won't say anything to anyone, I promise." "You're just like your mother." "You're not a mercenary," David replied. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you can stay, but promise not to tell anyone about anything. If I may, it's going to be hard to explain now." Back in her room, Vanessa took a long time to come to her senses. The man she had never dreamed of meeting turned out to be her master, the owner of a huge fortune and family. Vanessa tried not to think about it at all. After all, now it turned out that she had fallen in love with her own brother for the first time. Now her love was not only unrequited, hopeless, but also criminal. Incestuous. She had to forbid herself to even think about it. The ideal would be to quit this house and forget this family like a bad dream. About demanding something from her father, the girl did not even think about it. After sitting in the room for about half an hour, Vanessa decided to find Alan and consult with him. Besides, she wanted to question him, because he almost certainly knew she was the owner's daughter when he invited her to work in his house. Besides, she hadn't fulfilled her duties, and she was used to working responsibly. Right now, though, the thing she wanted most was to pack her things and leave for her hometown. Probably my mother also decided almost 20 years ago, when she refused all the benefits offered by my father, refused to destroy his family. Although she herself, with great difficulty, was able to raise her daughter on her feet. Maybe that's why she left life so early? There was a knock at the door. Vanessa realized she'd been in the room for quite some time. Did they notice her absence? Alan was at the door. "We need to talk," he said, and gestured for her to follow him. Vanessa thought it would be about her and the fact that she had learned the secret of her birth. However, judging by how tense and even angry the man was, the girl guessed that something similar had happened. "What do you think you're doing?" Alan asked. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa feigned innocence. "And pretending to be an innocent fool. And pretending to be an innocent fool. She's making a spectacle of herself here, saying that Ciara might slander you, and she's hanging herself around Matthew's neck." "I didn't hang myself. I fell down the stairs. He caught me. And at 12 this afternoon, I've been bombarded with questions about who he is and where he's from. I don't know where he is or how he's acting. I was checking the dust in the closet. Standing on the stairs, he quietly walked in. I lost my balance, almost fell. That's the whole story of our interaction. I swear to you. Learn, girl. I won't allow you to interfere in the lives of family members." "You won't? Then why did you bring me here? Or are you telling me you didn't know who the owner was? Or didn't you buy my mom an apartment when I was born? Didn't you look after her? You didn't find me?" "It doesn't matter. I just have one question for you. Why?" Alan didn't seem to be so much taken aback by the news as by the fierce intensity with which she spoke. "How do you know everything?" he wondered. "You probably haven't noticed that I look remarkably like my mother, but my father did. Besides, I saw a photo of them together, so there's no reason for me to be messing around with my own brother." Still not recovered, the man sat down and was silent for a few minutes, as if gathering his thoughts and choosing words. Finally, he spoke. "Yes, I did buy the apartment for Jessica. Because David had done her an injustice. He had no right to leave her like that, like a tired toy. Not her. Pride wouldn't let her tell him about the baby. Pride wouldn't let her ask for money to support her. That's why I didn't tell him anything about you. He just had no right to know that he had a child. His baby is his own. His own. But he'd already had Matthew by then. Yeah, another baby. I fell in love with her, and I wanted her to be my wife. I'd raise you like a daughter, take care of you and Mommy. But she loved your father and chose him again. Again. Don't you think there's too much you're leaving out?" Vanessa asked. "I don't need the whole truth. It doesn't concern me. Why did you bring me here?" "I wanted to keep you under supervision. I didn't think he'd recognize you. I didn't think he'd recognize you, that Matthew would be interested in you. You're just a child. You're not old enough to live on your own. That's why I found you, invited you to work here." "I can't stay here anymore," Vanessa said. "I'm sorry, but it's beyond me." "Why not? What's stopping you? Did David ask you to do this?" "No, he asked me not to tell anyone yet." "So stay here for now. I'll decide what's best." "Okay." While Vanessa was thinking of an answer, Alan got a call. "What? Where is he? Is he alive? What hospital is he in?" the man exclaimed. A moment later, he sprinted out of the room and rushed toward the service exit. Vanessa remained, not realizing what had happened. By late afternoon, it was learned that Matthew, while riding out of town in an automobile, had been involved in an accident. The likelihood that he would be alive was minimal. From the news, Vanessa could hardly stand on her feet. David rushed to see his son at the hospital. Alan was there too. The others had to wait to see if the young man would survive the night. By morning, it was reported that the boy needed a blood transfusion. And a few hours later, it became known that the injuries were much more serious than the doctors had decided the day before. A lot of blood was needed. In addition, the guy had a rather rare group the fourth negative. In such a situation, the ideal donor could be someone close to him. Vanessa's first impulse was to offer herself as a donor, but her Rh factor was positive. She was surprised by this. She had known since high school that children inherited their father's Rh factor, so it had to be the same for her and Matthew. Meanwhile, the search for a suitable donor was unsuccessful, and time was literally counting by minutes. Close relatives and all those who were in the hospital at the time were checked for a match. Unexpectedly, Alan turned out to be a suitable donor candidate. No one paid any attention to it at the time. Everyone was alarmed by the guy's condition and was glad that he would live. Recovery took quite a long time. The young and healthy body was taking its toll despite the serious injuries. Chiara was sent back to England by her father so as not to upset her. Besides, the school year was starting and the girl was just beginning her studies. The wedding due to the accident had to be postponed. It seemed that neither the bride nor the groom was particularly upset by this news. At the end of August, Matthew was discharged from the hospital. Vanessa, who all this time tried not to show her father in front of her eyes and not to remember about her inappropriate feelings for her brother, realized that her idea to go home at the beginning of summer was the most reasonable. It turned out that Alan had interrogated her on the day of the accident for a reason. Matthew had shared his plans for Vanessa with him. The guy really fell in love and planned to leave the bride imposed by her father. He was not at all embarrassed by the fact that his beloved was a maid and that his father would be furious when he found out about everything. He decided to share his plans with someone he had grown accustomed to trusting since childhood. Uncle Alanonu, his father's assistant and longtime friend, had actually raised the boy. In many ways, Matthew trusted him much more, so he decided to confide his plans for his upcoming marriage to him as well. Trust him, and ask for advice. Alan realized that the boy's youth and inexperience could ruin not only his life and career, but also hurt his father. In his first impulse, Alan wanted to send Vanessa back to her hometown. His plans were thwarted by an accident, and then he realized that he was doing to Matthew exactly the same thing his father had once done to David when he forced him to leave Jessica. However, he wasn't going to let their relationship go as far. Another naive, jilted girl and another unhappy child. No, that wasn't what Alan was going to allow. He made the decision to give them time to work things out. Maybe this relationship would work itself out, or maybe there was no love affair. Just a desire to go against his father's plans, so he decided not to get involved. Besides, it had been over 2 months, and the infatuation with the girl might have worn off in the young man's head. Unfortunately for him, Matthew not only did not forget about his infatuation with the young maid, but from the first day he decided to take active steps. And the first step was a huge bouquet, which Vanessa found under her door the next morning. There was no envelope with an indication of the giver, but it was not required. There were, and could be, no options. Vanessa decided to nip his advances in the bud. Entering the young man's room, she caught him warming up. After a month of forced bed rest and recovery from fractures, the guy decided to make up for lost time. His leg was still in a cast after a bad fracture, but he had already asked to have arm exercisers installed in the room. The moment Vanessa walked in, he was working out while listening to music through headphones. He couldn't hear her enter, and she froze, seeing him so perfect, so athletic. Apollo in a cast. Considering that she'd hardly had relationships or attention from guys before, she wanted to give in to his advances, if only for a short time, and then tell him everything, or silently disappear and live the rest of her life in happy memories. She must have been too deep in thought, because Matthew had noticed her presence and was saying something to her. I'm glad Vanessa seemed to have listened to the most important part of the conversation, considering how wide and happy the guy was smiling. I'm sorry, I was listening. What were you talking about? I was saying that I'm going to break up with her today and tell my dad. Tell him what? I guess I hit my head a little, Matthew joked. I couldn't help it, and I can hear you. I can't understand why you make decisions that affect me without asking my opinion. I thought you liked me too. There's a very, very, very big difference between liking you and running to the ends of the earth with you. But for example, you and I haven't met. I'm a maid. You're a millionaire's son. I'm a college graduate. You're a prestigious foreign university. You're rich and famous, I'm not. I wanted to finish, but she didn't dare. I don't see the problem. We've got plenty of time to get to know each other. How old are you? 19 soon. Great. Plenty of time to get a decent education. It's not like I'm dragging you to the wedding on your doorstep like Ciara and I did. Let's just be around each other and get to know each other. I like you a lot, and I can't believe you don't feel the same way about me. With those words, Matthew reached out his arms to her and gently pulled her to him. She should have resisted, should have turned away, should have pulled away and pushed him away. Great came a familiar voice. I'm gone for a couple weeks, and he's already smirking. With some girl. A furious Ciara stood in the doorway, glaring at the couple. Ciara, what are you doing here? Matthew didn't seem bothered by the fact that he was kissing another girl in front of his fiancée. He didn't even open his arms, still holding Vanessa to his chest. The same ones you did. You're so shameless. Now let her go. I don't know who you're hugging. It would have been nice if she was a famous model. Stop, Ciara shouted, yanking Vanessa's arm away from Matthew. I can't believe it. The maid. What are you doing here anyway? You haven't changed a bit. You're still the same ugly gray mouse. Ciara, stop it. Matthew stood up for Vanessa, not surprised that the girls knew each other. What are you, silent? Did you choke on your tongue as usual? What brings you here? Are you trying to get back at me? You sneak into my fiancé's house and get into bed with him. Don't get your hopes up, you won't get him. Ciara, you're wrong, Vanessa tried to justify herself. I took a job in this house, not knowing that it would soon be yours. I came to Matthew's room to see if he needed anything cleaned or brought in, and I accidentally fell on his lips. And he asked me to help him up out of his chair. I did, Ciara finished. You've never been good at lying, but now you decided to try. Well, that's a ridiculous excuse to fall for. Anyway, she turned to her fiancé. It's going to stop today, or else, well, she knows it will be otherwise. With that, the girl left the room, slamming the door so that a painting fell from the wall. The glass shattered into several dozen pieces, one of which bounced off and hurt Matthew's hand. Damn, what a fury. He laughed, trying to pull the shard out of the wound. Let me help, Vanessa said on impulse. But after a couple of minutes, Vanessa regretted it, because she found herself pressed against the door. The young man, not waiting for her to object, kissed her. Her legs gave out and she would have fallen if he hadn't put his arms around her. Gathering her will in a fist, she managed to pull away and say, "Don't ever do that again." But you liked it, didn't you? The guy grinned and reached for her for another kiss. This time, Vanessa managed to dodge. I have to clean this place up, she said, ducking out the door and trying to hide in her room as quickly as possible. After catching her breath, she went back to the kitchen, grabbed a dustpan and broom, and headed for Matthew's room. This time he was fully dressed and sitting in front of the TV. Calm down? Let's continue. I'm here to clean up the glass, Vanessa said. I hope you won't hurt your hand with anything else. Not anymore. But you didn't remove that shard from me either. If you behave like this, it'll stay in your hand, and you'll let it, Matthew said mockingly. And if it starts to get blood poisoning and I die without glory or honor? The young man's voice was enveloping and made him think of anything but work. No, I can't let David get blood poisoning, Vanessa said. No, you can't. He was the only one with the right blood. He's had a lot of it pumped out of him. That's right. That's the only thing worth living for. I'll appreciate him even more now. He's been my best and truest friend before, and now we're of the same blood. You were the same blood before. No one else had such a rare bloodline. Not even your parents, Vanessa blurted out. She was about to bite her tongue off for that last sentence, because Matthew clung to her like a bulldog. What's weird, your parents don't have a band like mine. I misspoke. And anyway, I have to go. Or you're not going anywhere until you explain what you meant. Matthew's tone went from playful to affectionate to categorical, unapologetic. I didn't mean anything, except that children most often inherit their parents' Rh factor, Vanessa said hastily. If I remember my biology course well, if a child has it negative, it means that he took it from his parents or one of them. So if my parents have it positive and I have it negative, I'm a foundling? No, why? Maybe your father's Rh factor is positive. Usually children inherit it from their father. But I'm not sure, I don't know. We should go to the hospital, she suggested. The boy seemed to understand everything and began to reason out loud. Alan's father is an acquaintance from childhood. They were friends. Alan devoted his whole life to sports, and his father went into business. When he was able to make good money, he invited Alan to become a personal security guard. Gradually, he took on other responsibilities such as running the house. Always together, always there for each other. Never a quarrel. And now Alan becomes the only suitable donor for me. Well, maybe you don't know and someone else helped? Vanessa suggested. There are all sorts of reasons why a person can't be a donor illnesses. For example, maybe your mom with the same rhesus. Vanessa regretted 100 times that she had voiced her doubts aloud. No, only Alan's Matthew cut her off. He seemed oblivious to the fact that Vanessa was still in the room. He gestured toward the door, signaling that she should leave the room. He picked up the phone from the table and dialed a familiar number. You can come to my room. It's an emergency. The guy shouted after he heard an attempted objection. Going downstairs, Vanessa ran into Alan on the stairs, who was walking with quick steps towards Matthew's room. Finishing her business, the girl returned to her room and began packing. It was naive to believe that she was in a position to fight this. It had some incomprehensible magical power over her, making her lose her will and her mind. The consequences could be most unpredictable and terrible. So she should have left the house, returned to her own place, and thought about how to live further, how and what to earn money for. About demanding from her father financial help or his participation in her life. The girl did not even think about it. She wanted to forget this page of her life. No sooner had she packed her things than the phone rang. It was Alan. He asked her to come up to Matthew's room. His voice was calm but strange. I told you not to go where you don't belong. Alan greeted her with those words as soon as she could enter. Wait, don't scare her before she's ready. Maybe things can still work out very well. Matthew cheered up after talking to Alan, as if he had heard great news. I don't understand what's going on, Vanessa said. Alan, I wanted to ask you to pay me back. I can't stay here any longer. Of course, you've made a mess, and you're in the bushes. No, darling, you're not going to do it now. No, dear, you're not going anywhere now, Alan grinned. Matthew tried to grab the girl's hand. The attempt, however, was unsuccessful, and he fell back onto the bed where he had been sitting. Vanessa instinctively rushed over to him for support. I told you she loves me too, Matthew laughed, standing up easily and hugging the girl. I see that history is repeating itself again. And your father will not be happy about this news. Alan shook his head. Not to mention your fiancée and her father. My fiancée is in front of you, Matthew objected. Will someone please explain to me what's even going on here? Vanessa pulled out of Matthew's embrace. She looked from one to the other, trying to figure out what they were hiding. Alan, tell me. She knows half of this terrible secret anyway. Besides, she thinks she's in love with her brother. And don't argue, I can see that you like me, the guy said when the girl tried to get indignant. Judy, sit down. This is going to be a long conversation, Alan said. David and I grew up in the same neighborhood. Ever since kindergarten, we've done every mischief together. Never fought, always helping each other out. We lived like that for almost 10 years until a military family moved in next door. The incoming officer and his wife had a beautiful daughter, Addison. As you can imagine, that's Matthew's mom. We were both crazy about her, chasing her around like puppies. And we weren't the only ones. She was the star of the school within a year. Nobody even noticed her at first. And then we graduated and moved away. And we met at the New Year's Eve ball at school, not knowing what David had charmed her with. They had an affair. But I didn't want to give up either, even though I couldn't stand in the way of their happiness. So I finally confessed everything to her and gave her a choice. She chose David? Vanessa asked. No, she did what a real woman would do. She stayed with one man and got pregnant by another, Matthew said angrily. Don't you dare say that. It's your mother. Alan almost punched the young man in the face. Matthew, stop it. Alan, what happened next? Tell me. As crude as it sounds, Matthew expressed the essence of what happened, Alan said. She did choose David, and she gave me a generous gift that I couldn't have hoped for on the last night. Who would have thought that was the night she'd get pregnant? Yeah. So that's why you have the same blood type? Vanessa guessed. Yeah, I've suspected that for a long time, Matthew said. I look a lot like you. The same habits. My father and I were always like strangers. When did you find out that Addison's baby was your son? When she and David set a wedding date, I decided to leave. Stay out of the way. I signed a contract and joined the army. Came back almost 6 years after I was wounded. No family, no money. David found me and invited me to stay with him. The first time I saw Matthew, I knew he was my son. I don't know how the others didn't see it. That's around the time David met Jessica. I thought to myself, this is my chance. Jessica's going to leave, and I'm going to marry Addison. And we'll all be happy, Alan said. Yeah, happy, Matthew queried. Did you forget that in the world of money, no one's happy? Yeah, you're right. And Addison had made it clear to me that she didn't want me. To be honest, I'd grown cold to her during the separation. So I helped David cover up the whole Jessica thing. I bought her an apartment while I looked after her. You fell in love? Vanessa asked. You sure did. We even have the same taste in women. Only Jessica remained faithful to her first, and only love for the rest of her life. Yeah, Mom never looked at another man after that, Matthew confirmed. Well, it was a story that was gradually forgotten. David took his family abroad. I went with them. I lived in 2 countries. And when Jessica was gone, I decided to move Vanessa closer to me so I could keep an eye on her. Addison and his son decided to come back to America too? Vanessa guessed. And then you know the rest, my friends. I don't know how you fell in love, but this guy interrogated me today. I had to come clean. So you're Matthew's father? Vanessa asked. Does David know? No, I don't think so. Anyway, we've never talked about it. Yeah, it's a real passion, Vanessa shook her head. It's like a movie. It's better than that, Matthew grinned. Now, I don't know if my alleged father will send me away and bequeath all his millions to you. Matthew, stop it. It's not funny. That's not funny. It's only fair, really. and I won't have to marry you or your daughter. I mean, he doesn't need me to make family connections with his business partners. Hey, I'm a good sport about this. Hey, I'm a good sport about this. You're going to be a rich heiress, and I'm going to get you again. Then I'll have the money again. Matthew seemed to be enjoying the situation. I wouldn't be so happy if I were you, Vanessa said. I think we should keep it a secret. At least for now, Alan said. I mean, Dad, are you crazy? Where's the secrecy going to go from here? So for a quarter of a century, everyone was silent. And it's not like David hadn't guessed anything. I suggest we get everyone together at the family council and confess everything. Have a night of revelations, Matthew suggested. It turns out that both parents were dishonest, both cheated and both had children on the side. Yourself? Alan questioned. But in fact, I'm an illegitimate child too. I'm not sure everyone will be as thrilled, Vanessa replied. I'm sure we can't keep quiet, Matthew insisted. Let's do it this way. I'll tell David myself. And then we'll think about it. The three of them went about their business. And not knowing that the capricious and resentful Ciara had already complained to her father about her fiancé Matthew. The man had never been known for his gentle nature, being resentful and suspicious. The fact that his potential partner couldn't keep his son in line meant that he would be just as soft in business, and he didn't want to do business with such people. By the time Alan had persuaded Matthew and Vanessa to keep quiet and not tell anyone what they'd learned, Ciara's father had already ordered the withdrawal of his investments in all of David's projects. Breaking up the deals threatened to lose large sums of money. Not getting a clear answer from his subordinates, David went home in a frenzy to seek an answer from his son. And the first person he saw in Matthew's room was his newfound daughter Vanessa in his son's arms. How dare you? David screamed at Vanessa. Did you purposely show up to destroy my family? I will crush you to dust. And you, puppy, he said to Matthew, get dressed immediately and go to your fiancée. I don't care how, but you will beg her forgiveness. You'll restore the engagement. Her father will get his money back, invested in my business. And I'll deal with you later, he said to Vanessa. I wouldn't be in such a hurry, Matthew replied. Besides, you can't tell me what to do. I'm not even your subordinate, let alone anything more. What did you say? David was outraged. I'll take everything away from you. You'll forget what expensive cars and resorts look like, where you used to spend my money. I'm scared, Matthew replied calmly. I'm already educated. Thank you, I'm sure, but you can't take it away. But you can't take it away from me. I'll take care of the rest. You've never earned a penny in your life. You've never earned a penny in your life. Now you're showing a little attitude, David continued to shout. I'm a grown man. As soon as I'm in shape, I'll leave your apartment. What's the holdup? I can have the room today. I think it's rightfully yours for your child to occupy. Yes, Dad, Matthew said calmly. Or did you think that your little secret of having a daughter out of wedlock would remain a secret? David turned pale and sat back in his chair. He seemed suddenly short of breath. What makes you think that? He hissed. Oh, don't say that. I have the courage to confess. And bonus, you get one more little secret. But just in case you think I'm hugging my own sister, Matthew. What are you talking about? David shook his head. Yeah, so he didn't know. Well, Alan wanted to tell you, but I beat him to it. Tell me what? Dad, have you known this your whole life? Matthew stared at his father. Didn't you ever see anything in me in common with him? Even I had my doubts as a child, when he and I had common tastes and interests. That's impossible. Addison was faithful to me, David said stubbornly. By and large, yes. They had a little adventure with your friend before you got married. That's why he moved away, so that he wouldn't interfere with your happiness. You're wrong about what? That I'm his son? Matthew asked. I assure you I only found out today. Or rather, I guessed it, thanks to your clever and attentive daughter Vanessa. It was in her bright head came the idea that the parents with a positive Rh factor, having the second type of blood, cannot have a child with the fourth negative. Genetics is a scary, stubborn, and surprisingly accurate in such matters. I checked. Vanessa was right. The fact that Alan was the only suitable donor only made her suspicious. And you should have warned us all, Matthew continued wryly. Why? Because you should have been in school, not skipping classes. Vanessa looked at Matthew and couldn't believe her own eyes. In just one morning he had gone from a sweet and handsome boy to a tough and sarcastic one. He seemed to enjoy seeing the effect his words had on David. Meanwhile, the man was getting worse, as he unbuttoned his shirt collar and loosened the knot of his tie. From the change in his complexion, his condition was alarming. Matthew, stop it, Vanessa exclaimed. You can see he needs help. Grabbing the phone, she called an ambulance. Then she called Alan and David's driver. Together they managed to carefully take the man downstairs to the exit, where the ambulance was already arriving. The girl decided to accompany her newfound father to the hospital. She instructed Alan to talk to Matthew so he wouldn't do anything stupid again. David was taken to the hospital just in time. On the background of high blood pressure and stress, he had a stroke. Fortunately, there were doctors nearby, which meant that it was hoped that the consequences would not be so devastating. The man stayed in hospital for about 2 weeks, after which there was a long period of rehabilitation. Vanessa lived between the hospital and home. Even though her father had received excellent care at the expensive hospital, she was terrified to even imagine that she could lose her last loved one, barely finding him. She'd only crossed paths with Matthew a couple times in all this time. He, too, seemed to have lost interest in her. As soon as the cast was removed from her leg, Matthew moved out of the house without telling her where he was going. Before he left, he contacted his mother, who was in Los Angeles, and warned her that she shouldn't show up at their new home yet, for her father had found out her little secret. Don't feel bad about it, Addison replied. He has one of his own. Suddenly, his illegitimate daughter, Ciara, had turned up and was now staying in his bed. He's probably already made her his sole heir. So you have no business in LA, Matthew said sharply. What daughter? What are you talking about? Matthew, your life with him has never been perfect, Addison replied. So I don't think you're surprised by this news. Besides, he's a man, and men have a tendency to have affairs on the side. At least, I understand him. Besides, it's not your place to complain about him. Hisham. How's he doing? He'll live. They got him to the hospital on time, and he's got the best doctors in the world. Have you been to see him? No, why? As it turns out, I'm nothing to him now. He raised you? Even if you didn't know he wasn't your father, he put all his heart, soul, love, and a lot of money into you. Is that what you're saying? That too. How can you be so callous? I'm not callous. I'm sober. There's no point in me staying there now, which is why I'm calling you so you don't accidentally show up. I'm on the next flight out. It's a shame your health and the lives of your family don't mean anything to you. I'm sorry. In spite of everything, your father and I have been together for over 20 years. It's up to you. Don't be surprised to find a new mistress at home. Let me handle this. The next day, the woman was in New York. She decided to come home later and went to the hospital right after the airport. Her husband's condition was indeed quite satisfactory. Still, a healthy and fairly young body was able to cope with such a test. In the corridor, Addison met Vanessa. Surprisingly, the girl seemed completely different from how her son had presented her. Even though they had a romantic relationship looming, David was resting after his treatments, so the woman decided to ask Vanessa about him. Vanessa talked about David's well-being and the doctor's prognosis. Somehow, imperceptibly, the conversation turned to who Vanessa really was. The girl told how she herself had found out that her master was her father, how Matthew had guessed that Alan was his father. In fact, they hadn't noticed how they had talked for hours, sitting in the quiet hospital cafe. After talking to the girl, Addison went to her husband's room and Vanessa went home. She was to give the order to prepare a room for the mistress. Lately, she had taken over the housekeeper's duties and was doing a fine job with them. Alan was away on a business trip. Addison came home in the evening and was pleasantly surprised to see that they had prepared for her arrival. She said that they had discussed things with her husband calmly without mutual complaints or recriminations. In the end, they came to the conclusion that they would keep the family together, because many years had passed since their transgressions. Matthew David promised to help with his own business, and Vanessa to send to study. Now it was their mutual children. Besides, Vanessa had no one else but them. Sometimes life presents us with serious tests of willpower, kindness, loyalty, humanity. It is important not only to deal with the problem, but also to understand and learn the lesson. And the most important thing is to remain human in any situation. Vanessa was lucky. Life compensated her for the most difficult loss with several new acquisitions: family, prospects, opportunities, study. And although no one and nothing could replace her mother, now she could rely on her father.